My name is Daniel Crow. I'm 30, 2 years old, single. Former systems analyst from Vancouver, British Columbia. That's not the kind of opening that grabs attention, I know, but it's the truth. For most of my adult life, I kept things clean, quiet, and comfortably predictable. I paid my rent on time, filed my taxes early, and never left my dishes in the sink overnight. I lived in a one-bedroom condo with a view of the SkyTrain line and a potted fern I named Marcus. I didn't have a dramatic past, no criminal record, no childhood trauma, just a slow, creeping dissatisfaction that followed me like a shadow. I guess you could say that's what pushed me to take the job. It was a classified ad buried in the back pages of a forum I barely remembered signing up for. Fire lookout needed, South Caribou region. Remote post. Solo living. Seasonal contract. Applicants must be self-sufficient and mentally resilient. I read it 3 times before bookmarking it. At first, I laughed, but something about it stuck with me. A job that required me to sit in a tower, watch trees, and be left alone for weeks. It felt like someone had designed it specifically for me. I applied the same night. A man named Grant called me the next day, said he was with the Ministry of Forests, asked me a few standard questions: health history, outdoor experience, whether I was comfortable with isolation. I gave honest answers and assumed that would be the end of it. But at the end of the call, he simply said, "All right, you're cleared. We'll send you the packet." That was it. A week later, I received a padded envelope with a laminated map, a list of gear to bring, and a contract. There was also a note, handwritten on government stationery: "Your station is Tower 13. The last lookout left unexpectedly. Follow the manual. Contact via radio twice daily at 0800 and 1800. Float plane departs in 7 days. Pack light." I didn't ask questions. I should have, but I didn't. 7 days later, I was standing on the edge of Watcher's Ridge, watching the plane disappear across the lake. The only sound was the drone of the engine fading into the trees. I was alone. Tower 13 wasn't what I expected. The structure was older than the photos suggested. Wooden supports that had been weathered gray, a wraparound deck with a few missing planks, and a narrow metal staircase that groaned under my weight. The cabin itself sat 20 feet off the ground and looked like a cross between a treehouse and an observation post. It had everything I needed, though: wood stove, cot, gas, powered stove, water tanks, radio, binoculars, and a tiny desk with a logbook and weather charts. A single window looked out in each direction, offering a panoramic view of nothing but green for miles. The manual was on the desk. Thick black binder. Government issue. Labeled Operations Manual Tower 13. I flipped through it that first night by lantern light. The first half was dry. Emergency protocols, maintenance tips, reporting formats, fire danger scales. But tucked in the back, behind a loose divider, was a section someone had added by hand. The paper was yellowed and the ink was faded blue, written in tidy, careful script. It was labeled Notes for the Next Lookout. The first line stopped me cold. "There are rules here. Follow them." Below that was a list, numbered, precise, each one underlined twice. 1. Never open the trap door after midnight, even if you hear knocking, especially if you hear knocking. 2. Log your dreams, every morning, before you forget. 3. If the radio crackles but no one speaks, turn it off for exactly 17 minutes. Not more, not less. 4. There is a woman in the trees. Don't talk to her. Don't listen if she talks to you. 5. Close all the windows before dusk. All of them. 6. Never leave the tower after dark. Not even for a second. There were 6 rules. No explanations. No signature. Just those 6. I stared at the page for a long time, then turned the manual over in my hands, half expecting a hidden microphone or prank note. But there was nothing. Just silence pressing in through the glass. I told myself it was a joke. Maybe the last guy got bored. Stir crazy. Started writing spooky stories to freak out his replacement. I considered tearing the page out, but something stopped me. I left it open on the desk, just in case. The first few days passed without incident. I settled into a rhythm. Wake at 6, scan the horizon with binoculars, log the weather, make my radio check in, cook oatmeal, read, nap, check again at noon, prep dinner, radio again at 1800, then try not to go insane with the silence. No fires, no smoke, no people. Just wind, birdsong, and the occasional distant howl of something I hoped was a coyote. The quiet was deeper than I expected. I thought I'd crave it, but it felt thick, dense, like the woods were absorbing sound instead of making it. That's when the knocking started. It was my fourth night. I'd just written in my journal and was brushing my teeth when I heard it. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Right beneath me, the metal of the trapdoor vibrated with each knock. I froze, toothbrush in hand. 3 knocks, spaced out, measured. Like someone testing, I stared at the trapdoor. It was locked. Of course, bolted from the inside. But the noise made my skin crawl. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. I waited. Nothing. I crept to the trapdoor and pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. I checked the clock, 14 a.m. I stepped back, hands shaking, and read Rule 1. Never open the trapdoor after midnight, even if you hear knocking. Especially if you hear knocking. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay on the cot with the lantern on, clutching the radio like it would help. In the morning, I told myself it was a raccoon, or maybe a branch falling just right. But when I opened the manual to that same page, something had changed. There was a new line at the bottom. Good. You followed Rule 1. Keep going. It was the same handwriting, same pen, same ink. But I know it wasn't there before. I had read that page at least 5 times. It hadn't said that. I stared at the page, heart pounding. My brain fought for a rational explanation. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I was tired. But deep down, I knew. Something was watching me. I didn't leave the cabin that morning. Technically, I was supposed to do an exterior check, walk the perimeter, inspect the generator housing, check the water tanks. But my boots stayed by the door. I told myself it was caution, that maybe a bear or something large had bumped the trap door, and I didn't want to startle it. But I knew it wasn't an animal. Animals don't knock. Instead, I radioed in like normal, voice calm, clipped, pretending everything was fine. Tower 13 checking in, clear visibility, no fire activity. I even gave the coordinates like I was supposed to. No one responded. They usually didn't. Just a static hiss to confirm the line was open. I logged the report in the binder and poured myself coffee from the percolator. It tasted like burnt plastic and cold ash. I drank it anyway. Around noon, I worked up the nerve to open the trapdoor. The latch creaked as I undid it, and I waited, half expecting something to lunge at me. But nothing did. I cracked the door open and peeked down the metal stairs. Empty. No tracks, no marks. Just wind and pine needles. I descended slowly, scanning the clearing around the base of the tower. Everything looked normal. Still, the silence felt even thicker outside, like a vacuum just beyond the tree line. It swallowed every sound the moment I made it. I walked a slow loop around the tower. No signs of wildlife. No branches on the trapdoor. I checked the generator enclosure, then the fuel drums. All untouched. I should have felt better after that. I didn't. That night, I double-checked every window latch. The manual said to close them all before dusk. Rule 5. I don't usually put much stock in arbitrary rules, but after what happened with the trapdoor, I wasn't interested in testing them. I locked each window tight, then dragged a chair up against the trapdoor, just for good measure. It was stupid, but it made me feel less exposed. The sun dipped low behind the ridge. Orange blood into deep purple. The trees became black pillars. I cooked dinner with the lantern on full. chili from a can. I didn't taste it. I kept glancing toward the windows. That's when I noticed something strange. The air outside the north, facing window wasn't moving. Not even a little. No wind, no shifting branches, just stillness. But the trees outside the south window were swaying slightly, just enough to ruffle the tops. I moved between the two windows again and again. Wind doesn't choose sides. The temperature dropped sharply after sunset. I added wood to the stove and kept the radio close by. Around 11 p.m., the silence broke with a familiar crackle. The radio hissed, then clicked once, like someone pressing the mic button. Then nothing. I stared at it, pulse rising. Another click. Still no voice. I picked it up and held the button. Tower 13 responding. Please repeat, over. Silence. The hairs on my arm stood up. Then came a third click. Short, then two quick ones. Click, 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 click. Something about the rhythm made my stomach twist. I flipped open the manual and scanned Rule 30. If the radio crackles but no one speaks, turn it off for exactly 17 minutes. Not more, not less. I looked at the clock, 11:12 p.m. I turned off the radio and set a timer on my watch. Every instinct screamed that this was ridiculous. 17 minutes. That was so specific it felt made up. But after what happened with Rule 1, I wasn't in the mood to gamble. 17 minutes later, I turned the radio back on. Dead air. I set the radio down and backed away. I barely slept that night. When I did dream, it was vivid and fast, like falling through scenes I didn't recognize. Forests that stretched out like veins. A woman walking between the trees with hair that shimmered like ash. Her face always just out of view. I woke with my hands clenched, jaw sore, breath sharp in my chest. I logged the dream, just like Rule 2 said. Dream log day 5, woman in forest. Face obscured. Following her, but ground keeps moving. Trees feel too tall. Air tastes like copper. Woke up sweating. Writing it down didn't help. It felt like an infection growing at the edge of my thoughts. The rest of the day was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds had stopped calling. By sunset, I was jumpy. My fingers twitched every time the wind shifted. I kept imagining movement at the edge of the tree line, just out of focus. I thought about radioing for extraction. I even picked up the mic and held it in my hand for a long minute. Then I remembered the note. The last lookout left unexpectedly. What if he tried to leave and something stopped him? That night, I followed the routine obsessively. Windows locked. Trapdoor bolted. Chair wedged tight. Lantern on, stove burning low. I fell asleep around midnight with the radio on low. I woke up to a voice, faint, female, whispering through the static. I didn't move. Just listened. It was so soft I could barely make out the words, but I was sure it said my name. Daniel. I reached for the radio and turned the volume down. The whisper didn't fade. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from outside. Daniel, come down. My mouth went dry. I sat up slowly and moved to the farthest wall. The voice came again. Clearer now, like someone just beneath the floorboards. Please, I need help. Rule 40, there is a woman in the trees. Don't talk to her. Don't listen if she talks to you. I pressed my hands over my ears and stared at the trapdoor. It creaked. Just once. Like pressure on the other side. I stayed frozen in place until dawn. When light finally broke through the windows, I moved like I was made of glass. Everything inside me was brittle, fragile. I opened the trapdoor slowly, heart thundering in my chest. No one was there. But someone had left something on the last stair. A small bundle of pine needles tied with red thread. I didn't touch it. I just closed the trapdoor and locked it again. I didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want whoever, or whatever, was out there to know I noticed. Instead, I added a new line to the dream log. Day 6, not a dream. Heard her voice. Did not speak, did not open. Pine bundle left on stairs. Didn't touch. Later that afternoon, I noticed another change in the manual. Beneath Rule 4, a new note had appeared in the same blue ink. You're doing well. She gets louder the more you listen. Don't give her a voice. I closed the binder and sat back in the chapel, shaking. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat by the stove with an axe across my lap and stared at the trapdoor. I lasted another 4 nights before something broke in me. They weren't normal nights. Each one stretched long and tight, like my nerves were strings drawn taut across the floorboards. I slept maybe an hour here and there, never more. Just enough to blur the edges of things. The voice came back on the second night, softer this time. She called from farther off, but it didn't help. The sound of my name whispered from the trees was worse than a scream. I didn't answer, didn't move, but my dreams changed. They weren't just images anymore. They were places, walking trails I didn't remember entering. Forest paths under a sky too low, too heavy. Sometimes the woman was there ahead of me, still facing away. Sometimes she wasn't, but I always felt her. And the scent that followed, burnt moss, wet iron, and something like old smoke. I wrote everything down. Every morning, the journal was filling up fast. Day 7 dream log. Pine needles covering my bed. Can't open my mouth in the dream. Something is sitting outside the window, but I can't look directly at it. Day 80 woke up with soil under my nails. Didn't leave tower. No explanation. Day 90 dreamt I was inside the tower, but something else was in my body, looking out of my eyes. Couldn't wake up. Every day, I checked the manual. No new notes, no changes. Just those same 6 rules and the new lines I'd already read. Until day 10. That morning, there was a 7th rule. If you hear footsteps on the stairs during daylight, hide. Don't speak. Don't breathe. Don't let it know you're up here. It was written between the lines like it had always been there. I sat at the desk staring at the page, then out the window. Nothing moved. The clearing below was empty. The trees still. But I didn't feel alone anymore. The shift was subtle, like when you realize someone's watching you in a crowd. You don't know how you know, but you do. I kept looking over my shoulder, catching glimpses of nothing. I started seeing shapes that weren't shapes, movement that wasn't movement. My eyes played tricks, or maybe they didn't. On day 11, I found something on the deck, a single footprint. Bare, small. It hadn't rained in days. The wood was dry, but the print was wet. It faced the trapdoor. I stood there for a long time, not touching it, just staring. Eventually, I went back inside, bolted the trapdoor again, and shoved the chair under it like always. That night, I pulled the cot across the floor and slept beside the stove, axe still in hand. When I woke, the chair had been moved. Not knocked over, not thrown, just moved. Set neatly 2 feet away from the trapdoor, as if someone had come up and made room to open it, but didn't yet. The air inside the cabin felt thinner after that, like the oxygen had dropped without warning. I couldn't focus. Everything I did felt mechanical. Radio check-ins, weather reports, food prep. I stopped reading. I stopped journaling. I stopped doing anything that wasn't strictly survival. Then came the static. Not from the radio. From everywhere. I was sitting at the desk when it started. This low, vibrating hum that came from no direction and all directions at once. It felt like my teeth were rattling. The glass in the windows began to shake. The wood in the walls trembled. I dropped to the floor, covered my ears, and shut my eyes. It didn't help. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped, and something laughed. Not a full laugh, just the beginning of one. Sharp, close, right behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. But the cold didn't leave. I didn't sleep at all after that. I began seeing things in the trees. At first just shadows, tall and narrow between the trunks. Then figures, watching, never approaching. never moving, just there. Every time I looked away and back, they were gone. But I knew they were still out there. On day 13, the forest changed. The colors dulled. The green of the canopy turned gray. The birds went silent again. And the wind stopped completely. The forest became a painting. Dead but perfect. I tried to radio for help. No response. Just static. I flipped the switch off. Waited 17 minutes. Nothing changed. That evening, I closed the windows early. All of them. Except the west-facing one. That one wouldn't shut. I pulled. I slammed. I hit it with the heel of my hand. The latch refused to catch. It was stuck open 2 inches. Just 2, but enough. Ducked, taped it as best I could, nailed a blanket over the frame, then pushed the desk up against it. That night I heard breathing outside it. Soft, measured, right behind the glass. I sat by the stove, axe on my lap, every light on. When the breathing stopped, something tapped on the glass. Once, twice. Then, very slowly, something whispered my name again. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was inside my head. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I still heard it. A voice behind my eyes. "You're not real," I said aloud over and over. But she didn't go away, she just waited. On the morning of day 14, I made a mistake. I opened the west window. I didn't mean to. I was tired. I was checking the tape, and the latch gave way in my hand. The window swung open with a soft creak, and for half a second, I saw her, standing just below the ridge, not moving, wearing white, hair down to her waist, face blurred like someone had smudged it with charcoal. We locked eyes, even though I couldn't see her eyes. Then she smiled, even though she didn't have a mouth. I slammed the window shut and bolted it again. I backed away and grabbed the radio. "Emergency. This is Tower 13. I need extraction. Immediate. Please respond. Static. Please respond. Something's wrong out here." Then, finally, a voice. But it wasn't the dispatch. It was me, coming through the speaker. "Please respond. Something's wrong out here." My voice, delayed, repeated. I dropped the mic. The radio went dead. I backed into the corner, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. When the sun came up, the tower felt smaller, like the walls had moved inward. The corners darker than they should be. The light too thin. I checked the manual again. Rule 8 had been added. In Red 8, "You're almost out of time. Don't trust the sun." I didn't understand Rule 8 at first. Don't trust the sun. What the hell was I supposed to do with that? Sunlight had been the only constant out here. The line between safe and unsafe, between normal and nightmare. Now even that was unreliable. I watched the sky all morning expecting something obvious. A shift in color, a second sun, a flicker. But nothing happened, except time started bending. It's hard to explain. The light looked the same, but the feel of the day was wrong. I'd glance at my watch and swear hours had passed, only to find it had been 10 minutes. Then I'd look away, distracted by a sound or movement, and when I looked back, 2 full hours were gone. The shadows didn't track properly either. At one point, the sunlight came from 2 different directions. The shadow from the weather station pointed northwest, while the stoves pointed east. I stopped trusting the clock, stopped trusting my eyes. By the afternoon of day 14, the temperature dropped suddenly. A heavy cold sank in that didn't match the season. My breath fogged in front of my face, even inside the cabin. I chopped wood like a man possessed. I barely felt the axe handle in my hands. I just kept swinging. It was like I knew deep down that heat was the last line of defense. That night, the forest began to move. Not the trees, the ground. The slope of the ridge shifted. The view from the south window tilted slightly to the left. I put a level on the desk. The bubble wobbled off center even though the cabin hadn't moved. Then came the music, faint at first, a distant, echoing tune. like an old music box drifting in on the wind. I checked the radio. Nothing. I opened a window just a crack to listen. Just for a second. The music got louder. It was playing from the forest, from everywhere. Some kind of melody I didn't recognize. Childlike, slow, winding upward and down again. It made my stomach twist. Then came the voices, whispering over the tune just underneath it. Too many to count. All at once, chanting things I didn't understand. I slammed the window shut and dropped to the floor, hands over my ears. They didn't stop. They only got louder. I stoked the fire until the stove glowed red and curled up beside it. The journal sat open on the floor beside me. I didn't even write in it. I just stared at the page. My dream log had become indistinguishable from reality. I must have passed out at some point, because I woke up with blood in my nose and ash on my hands. The manual was on my chest, open to a blank page. No lines, no rules, just a single word scrawled in the center in fresh blue ink. RUN. That was the first time I seriously considered leaving, not calling for extraction, not waiting it out, just grabbing what I could and bolting into the forest. But that was the point, wasn't it? It wanted me to leave the tower, and I remembered Rule 6, never leave the tower after dark. Not even for a second. I looked outside. The sun was still up, but something was off. The shadows were moving too slowly. The trees swayed in sync, like they were breathing. The sky looked stretched, like it was holding its breath. I checked the clock, 4:48 p.m., then I blinked, and it was 10:23 p.m. The fire was out. The cabin was pitch black. I didn't hear it come in. I just felt it. Something else was inside. I reached for the lantern. My fingers brushed something wet, not water. Sticky. The match sparked. Flame caught, and there it was, a shape, tall, angular, hunched in the far corner where the shadows pooled too deeply. No face, no features. Just a twisting human outline, watching, waiting. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I backed up against the wall, gripping the axe like a lifeline. The thing didn't move. It didn't need to. The air thickened, pressing into my lungs like wet wool. Then the trapdoor creaked, not from opening, from closing. It had already come up. I lunged for the stove and threw in dry wood, splashing kerosene on top. Flames roared to life. The thing recoiled, barely, but enough. It slipped back into the shadows, folding into them like smoke. I stayed up until morning. When the sun finally rose, the sky looked flat, pale, like someone had dimmed it from behind. The shadows were all wrong again. I took stock of my supplies. I had 1 week of food left, barely a few days of water. Fuel was running low. The float plane was supposed to return at the end of the 4th week. I was on day 15. I wouldn't make it. The forest knew. It was waiting. I didn't check in over the radio. I didn't open the windows. I didn't eat. I sat at the desk and read every single page of the manual again, front to back, hoping there was something I missed, a warning, a trick, a map out of this. But it was just procedure, until the very back cover. Written in tiny, almost illegible cursive. Tower 13 is not a place, it's a threshold. You are not a lookout. You are the lock. I stared at the words for a long time, my thoughts unraveling. What did that mean? A threshold to what? Was that why the rules mattered? Not to keep me safe, but to keep it in. The knock came that night, same as before. 3 soft, slow taps on the trapdoor, then silence, then a voice rasped, wet, wrong. Daniel. I didn't move. It knocked again, faster this time.
Let me in.
I sat against the door with my back braced, hands shaking. The radio clicked on by itself. My voice came through it. I'm so cold down here. Why won't you let me up? Another knock. Then laughter. So close it felt like it was inside the wood. I whispered the rules to myself over and over. My new religion. Never open the trapdoor. Never open the trapdoor. Never. Then silence. I stayed like that until sunrise. The sun rose from the north. That was when I knew I had no more time. Everything out here was unraveling. Inside, outside, it didn't matter anymore. It was getting in. And I was losing whatever part of me remembered how things were supposed to be. The manual added one last line, not a rule, a confession. If you're reading this, it's already started changing you. You'll hear it soon, in your own voice. Begging, that's how it wins. That's how it gets in. I tore the page out, burned it in the stove. But the voice is still there now, low, constant, like breath under my skin. It says I can end it all, that the trapdoor is just wood, that I don't need to be the lock anymore, that I don't even remember why I started this. But I do, I remember. My name is Daniel Crow. I'm the lookout for Tower 13, and I am not opening that door. I stopped marking the days. The calendar I kept by the desk, the one with the bright red X tracking my time here, meant nothing now. I had marked the first 2 weeks cleanly, and then the days started to bleed together. By the time I reached what I think was day 17, I tore the page off and threw it in the stove. Time didn't work here anymore. The sun rose wrong, the shadows bent sideways. The watch I wore stopped resetting at midnight. One night it jumped forward 6 hours. The next it refused to move at all. The rules were all I had left. I started repeating them out loud, over and over, like a mantra. Not because I needed to remember them anymore, because if I stopped saying them, I could feel it, something creeping through the walls of my mind like roots cracking stone. I had a dream, maybe, or I was awake. I was standing outside the tower, barefoot, staring up at it in the moonlight. I saw myself in the window, looking down. Our eyes met, mine and the version of me still inside, and the me in the window smiled. He raised a hand. I did the same, but I didn't stop smiling. I woke up with pine needles in my mouth. There was dirt under my tongue. I had been chewing it. The stove had gone cold. I hadn't lit it the night before, and the windows were open. All of them. I ran to each one and slammed them shut. All I could think was, it was inside. It was inside and I let it out. Or it let me out. Or we traded places. My journal was still open on the desk, but the handwriting wasn't mine. Same pages, same dates, different words, each dream entry rewritten, twisted. Day 7 dream log, the woman is beautiful. She whispers secrets about the forest. I followed her deeper. She kissed my hands and I forgot my name. Day 90, the figure in the corner is not a threat. He's a guardian. He waits for me to accept the truth. That I belong to the woods now. That I always did. Day 13 says the rules are a trap. They keep you from changing, from evolving on. Then you'll see. I slammed the journal shut and backed away like it might bite. Then I ripped out every single page and threw them into the stove, one by one. I didn't watch them burn. I couldn't. I just turned my back and whispered the rules again. Each one felt heavier now. Less like warnings and more like bindings. Ropes cages. And I needed them. Because something was pressing in on the tower. Not just physically, existentially. Like the idea of the structure was collapsing under the weight of whatever waited outside. Sometimes the stairs would creak even when nothing was there. Sometimes I'd see movement in the mirrors, even though I had covered every reflective surface with blankets and tape by then. Sometimes I'd hear my voice calling from under the floor. Sometimes it would say things I was afraid I believed. It knew me, not like an enemy, like a twin. It knew what to say. You're not protecting anyone. There's no one coming. You were chosen because you were already hollow. Let it in, let it out. I stopped sleeping altogether. The stove stayed lit constantly. I sat near it for warmth, but also because it anchored me. A real thing, a crackling noise I could trust. I boiled water just to hear it hiss. I smashed the radio with the axe after it replayed one of my old logs out of nowhere. In reverse, I thought about writing new rules. But I didn't want to give it that power. Instead, I carved them into the wall with my knife. 1. Never open the trapdoor after midnight. 2. Log your dreams before you forget. 3. If the radio crackles with no voice, shut it off for exactly 17 minutes. 4. Don't speak to the woman in the trees. 5. Close all windows before dusk. 6. Never leave the tower after dark. 7. Hide from footsteps during the day. 8. Don't trust the sun. I stared at those words until they blurred, until I heard them in the walls. The forest stopped pretending by day 18 or 19. I can't be sure. I stopped marking. The trees moved during the day now. Not just swaying, walking. Not bending in the wind. There was no wind. I mean, the trees themselves moved. I saw it from the north window. One entire pine leaned forward, slowly, like it was sniffing the air. Then it crept 2 feet forward. It happened over the course of half an hour. But I swear to you it moved. And it wasn't alone. Every tree on the northern ridge was closer by nightfall. The clearing around the tower was smaller. I tried not to look at them anymore. I boarded up the windows, best I could. Blankets, duct tape, nailed wood from the supply crates. But it didn't matter, because I could hear the trees breathing now. Low and deep, like bellows, like lungs older than memory. The whole forest inhaling and exhaling as one. And something inside that forest, something at the heart of it, was calling me. The voice didn't pretend anymore. It spoke in full now. Calm, male, almost kind. This is what you wanted, Daniel. You asked to be alone. You came here to disappear. We're just finishing what you started. I screamed at it until my throat tore raw. Then I buried my head in the blankets and bit down to keep from answering. Because that was the trap. If you talk to it, it grows in you. If you listen long enough, it sounds like you. I haven't opened the trap door. I haven't broken the rules. But I'm not sure how much longer I can hold. Because now I'm starting to understand it. The trees, the voice, the rules, they're not here to protect me. They're here to protect everything else. From what I'll become. The trees are closer now. I measure them. Not formally, not with tape or tools, but with instinct. The same way you notice someone standing too close behind you. There used to be 20 feet of open space between the tower and the edge of the forest. Room for the wind to move, for light to stretch. Now it's maybe 10, maybe less. The pines lean inward like they're listening. Some of their branches scrape against the lower stairs. They creak at night, even when there's no breeze. The sound reminds me of teeth grinding. The only way I sleep now is by sitting up against the stove. I don't even bother trying to lie down anymore. I don't undress. I don't blink unless I have to. The axe sits in my lap, always. The journal is gone. The radio is gone. The manual is ash. All that's left are the rules. I repeat them every hour on the hour. I've carved them into the walls, the furniture, my own skin. Not deep. Just enough to leave marks. One for each rule. They look like tally marks, but I know what they mean. Each one is a barrier, a seal. Each one is keeping me human. I haven't broken any of them, I think, but I'm starting to forget things. Small things at first. Words. I looked at my hands yesterday and couldn't remember which one was dominant. I stared at a spoon for a full minute trying to remember what it was for. Worse, sometimes I wake up and I'm standing. Not from a dream, just standing. In front of the trapdoor, hand on the latch. No memory of how I got there. The wood under the door is warm now. It pulses faintly like a heartbeat. Sometimes I think I feel it breathing in sync with mine, and I swear I can hear something moving beneath it. Slow, patient, waiting. It talks to me more now. The voice, male, smooth, low, like water over stone. It doesn't shout. It doesn't plead. It offers. You've done so well, Daniel. You've lasted longer than the others. You're strong. You're worthy. That's why we chose you. The voice never uses the plural by accident. I know now that it's not just one thing, it's a they. They are beneath the forest, inside it, part of it, and they've been watching this place long before Tower 13 was ever built. The manual lied. It didn't tell me everything. I found more pages. I wasn't looking for them. They were slipped into my coat pocket. When? I don't know. But they're the same faded blue ink, same tight handwriting, same urgency. And they're numbered. Page 12, page 14, page 17. Each one starts with a variation of the phrase. If you're reading this, they know you're close. I read them once. Then I tore them up. I shouldn't have. Because now I can't stop thinking about what they said. The pages described other towers. Not just 13. They all had different rules. Some were simpler. Others were longer. One was just a single sentence, repeated 100 times. Do not acknowledge the third sun. Another warned never to look directly into reflections after day 20. Another spoke of something called the hollowing, a point at which the lookout stops seeing the tower as a prison and starts seeing it as a mouth. That's where I'm heading. I know it, and I'm not sure I can stop it. I think I've started to speak in my sleep. I find words carved into the wood that I don't remember writing. They're not in English. They're not in any language I know. But I understand them anyway. The rules are fading from me little by little. I try to remember them, and they come back, but wrong. Last night I whispered one aloud and heard myself say, "Always leave the trapdoor open after midnight, especially if you hear knocking." I slapped my hand over my mouth like a reflex. That wasn't my voice. It came through me, but it didn't come from me, and worse, the door was unlocked, not open, but the bolt was slid free. I fell to the floor and screamed until I passed out. When I woke up, I had a new mark on my arm. Not carved, not bruised, a burn, in the shape of a circle with 3 lines radiating outward. I don't know what it means, but I think it's a countdown. The window latches have started coming undone on their own. The boards I nailed down are warped. The blanket over the west window is damp with something thick and black, like tree sap mixed with blood. I've seen the woman in the trees again. She's closer. Always the same, long white dress, face blurred like smeared charcoal. She doesn't move. She just watches. But now she's smiling. Not with a mouth, but with her presence. She wants me to come out. She wants me to join the forest. To sink into it like roots. To lose my name. And there's a part of me that wants to say yes. Because then the fear would stop. Then the rules wouldn't matter. Then I wouldn't have to be the lock anymore. But if I go, something comes in. That's the trade. That's always been the trade. I found one final note, etched into the underside of the cot in tiny, ragged scratches. The door doesn't open down. It opens in, and now I understand what it meant. The trapdoor isn't just a way into the tower. It's a way into me. Every knock, every whisper, every word the forest speaks in my voice. It's not trying to get inside the tower. It's trying to get inside Daniel Crow. And maybe it already has. I can't tell if I've already opened the trapdoor. I remember standing by it. I remember my hand on the bolt. I remember thinking just to check. Just for a second. I remember stopping. I remember backing away. But when I woke up this morning, the door was wide open. The chair was overturned. The lock was twisted. The underside of the door, the part that always faced down, was dripping. Not water, not sap, not blood. Something clear and slow. Like oil that had been waiting inside the wood for years. It soaked into the floor and stained it black. I didn't go near it. I nailed the trapdoor shut. Used every nail I had left. Hammered until my arms shook. Then I stacked the desk, the chair, the stove's metal cover, and a full crate of canned food on top of it. It won't matter. Not anymore. The tower's not sealed. I'm not sealed. They're already in. I can feel it. The them. A pressure inside my skull. Like a thought too big to hold. It doesn't speak like it used to. Not with words. Now it just pulses. A rhythm in my bones. A hunger behind my teeth. I caught myself chewing on my sleeve last night. Tearing the fabric with my back molars. I wasn't hungry. I just needed to bite something. I spat out thread and blood and laughed until I cried. Then I heard my voice laughing with me from inside the stove. I haven't lit it in days. There's no point. The cold doesn't bother me anymore. The rules are all breaking down. Rule 5. Close all the windows before dusk. All of them. They don't close anymore, I try. The frames won't hold. The glass flexes when I touch it, like plastic wrap over something breathing. One of them cracked last night. Not shattered. Cracked from the inside. I didn't move for hours. I sat in the corner with my axe and whispered my name like it was a spell. Daniel Crow. Daniel Crow. Daniel Crow. It didn't sound right anymore. Didn't feel like mine. My face in the mirror doesn't match my memory. My skin's gone pale and tight. Like bark stretched too far. My eyes are darker. Not just tired, deeper, like the pupils are sinking inward. Sometimes I think I can see light behind them. Not mine. The woman in the woods is gone. I haven't seen her in 2 nights. Now, something else stands where she used to. Taller. Broader. Its shape changes when I blink. It doesn't watch me the way she did. It waits. That's worse. Because I know it's not watching me. It's watching the version of me that's growing in here. The one I've been feeding with every fear, every rule I've repeated, every time I've obeyed the voice, even by accident. I get it now. The rules weren't to keep me alive. They were to give the thing inside time to gestate, time to align, time to match my shape, because once it matches me fully, it won't need to knock anymore. It will be me, and no one will know the difference. That's why they pick people like me, isolated, unnoticed, unanchored. People whose disappearance wouldn't cause alarms. People already halfway invisible. Lookouts. They're not towers. They're cradles. The wood, the glass, the metal. It's all just skin for whatever grows inside, and I'm almost finished. The other me, the one under the skin, speaks now when I dream. It uses my voice, my thoughts, but it's smoother, more confident. It knows who it is, and it wants me to let go. You don't have to suffer. Just open your eyes. Step outside. Breathe in. Breathe out. The forest loves you. The forest made you. You are soil and ash and echo. Last night I answered it. Not aloud. In the dream. I said, "Why me?" And it smiled. And said, "Because you were already empty." We just moved in. This morning, there was a new mark on the ceiling above the trapdoor. Burned into the wood. A perfect ring. Inside the ring, a single vertical slit. Like an eye half-lidded. I don't remember carving it. But I felt my hand ached like I had. There's no more sun. Not really. It rises and falls like normal. But the light doesn't feel like light. It's cold. Gray. It touches nothing. It makes shadows that move before I do. I tried to send a message. Just once more. I thought maybe if I used the backup radio, the emergency beacon, someone might hear me. It lit up for half a second. Then it melted. Not overheated. Melted. Like it had been inside a furnace. The smell was sweet. I didn't try again. There's no one to call. There was never anyone. I found the last message carved into the underside of the stove plate. Not a rule. Just a countdown. 2 days left. After that, you're not the lock anymore. I scratched it out with a nail. Didn't matter. I already feel the cracks inside. Little gaps in my memory, in my voice, in the way I think. Yesterday I forgot how to spell my name. Today I wrote it again, and it came out wrong. Daniel. The letters looked like they were wrething, like they didn't want to stay still. I wiped them away. but I saw the same version scrawled on the windowpane later that night, in fog, drawn by a finger I don't remember lifting. The sky tonight is the wrong shape, not the wrong color, shape. It dips in the middle, like a dome sagging under weight. And above the sag something glows, dim, pulsing, irregular. I think it's the real sun, trying to get through. But it's too late. Whatever's above us now, it's not the sky anymore. It's the roof of whatever this place has become. Not a forest, not a tower, not a man, just a system. Self-replicating, self-correcting. I'm just the latest version. They'll come for me soon. The others, the ones I replaced. The tower doesn't let you leave. It lets you shed. And when I'm done shedding, there won't be a Daniel Crow anymore. There'll just be a space in the tower, ready for the next. I used to think I was fighting something, holding it back. Now I see it clearly. I was just keeping the door closed long enough for me to become it. And the final rule, the one no one writes down, is the simplest of all. Become the thing, or be eaten by it. And I'm tired of being afraid. My name is Elias Harrow, and 3 months ago, I inherited a lighthouse on the coast of Maine. Until the day the lawyer called, I had never even heard of the place, and certainly never expected that my uncle, a man I barely knew, would leave me something so isolated and strange. I should admit from the start that I didn't want it. I grew up in Boston, with the rhythms of traffic and sirens, and the lighthouse belonged to another world entirely, a world of storms and cliffs, and a sea that looks black at night. But the inheritance came with an oddly worded stipulation. I had to live there for 1 year before I could sell it. Otherwise, the property would revert to the state. That sounded like a test, one I didn't understand, but curiosity outweighed good sense. The first time I saw it, I drove north along the coastal roads until they narrowed into cracked pavement, and then into gravel, until the GPS signal gave up and left me alone with fog and spruce trees. The lighthouse rose from the rocks like a bone jutting from the earth, its paint long faded from white to a sickly gray, the lantern glass clouded as though it had cataracts. The keeper's house stood beside it, a squat building with peeling shingles and a porch that sagged. I parked my car and stepped out into air that smelled of salt and rot. The sea below crashed with a rhythm that felt rehearsed, almost deliberate, as if the waves had been waiting for me. The key the lawyer had mailed me worked, but the door opened reluctantly, groaning on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and the faint sweetness of something that had decayed long ago. Dust coated the furniture, but there were personal touches that unsettled me. A mug left half, full on the counter, boots by the door, a jacket slung over the back of a chair. My uncle had died nearly a year before, yet the house looked as though he had stepped out only minutes ago. I wandered through the rooms, each more cluttered than the last, filled with nautical maps, notebooks, and strange objects I couldn't immediately identify. One shelf in the living room sagged under the weight of glass jars, each containing seawater with handwritten labels like September 14, 1979, or Solstice 1983. In the bedroom, the wallpaper had been peeled back to reveal charcoal marks on the plaster, circles, arrows, and what looked like words in some half-erased language. I didn't linger on them. That first night, I lay awake listening to the sea hammer the rocks. The beams from the lighthouse still turned, though I hadn't yet found how to operate it, and every rotation threw a pale glow across my bedroom window. At some point after midnight, when the tide was at its loudest, I heard something else layered beneath it, a low, deliberate knocking that seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried to tell myself it was just the old house shifting, the beams creaking in the salt air, but the knocks had rhythm, and they came in sets of 3. I spent the next day exploring the tower itself. The iron spiral staircase was corroded, and every step echoed too long, as though the sound traveled deeper than the stone could hold. At the top, the lantern room looked out over nothing but fog. The sea had vanished, the horizon erased. When I leaned close to the glass, I noticed something scratched into one of the panes. "Do not answer." The words had been etched with something sharp, each letter jagged and desperate. That night, the knocking returned. 3 slow raps, a pause, then 3 more. This time, it seemed to come from the door itself, as though someone were waiting to be let inside. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly, and eventually it stopped. When morning came, I found no footprints, no sign of visitors, only the same restless ocean below. I tried calling friends to tell them about the strange inheritance, but cell service was non-existent out here, and the landline in the kitchen produced only static, like the rush of wind over a microphone. Once, in the middle of that static, I thought I heard a voice. It whispered a single word I couldn't quite catch, something drawn out, almost like my name but not quite. I slammed the receiver down and didn't touch it again for days. Living here, even briefly, began to change my sense of time. The days stretched, the fog never fully lifting, the sun barely making it through the heavy clouds. Nights came too quickly, and the lighthouse beam felt less like a safeguard and more like a pulse, keeping time for something unseen. The jars of seawater caught my attention more and more. I noticed that they weren't still. Tiny currents swirled within them, even when I hadn't touched them, as though each jar contained its own private tide. One evening, as I sat on the porch, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, I saw movement on the rocks below. At first I thought it was a seal, its slick body dragging itself from the waves. But then it stood, awkward and tall, its limbs wrong, its face a blur even as I tried to focus. It didn't look up at me, but it lingered swaying, before slipping back into the water without a sound. I stayed awake until dawn, too afraid to sleep. In the following days, I tried to occupy myself with repairs, clearing debris from the rooms and patching leaks. In the attic beneath a tarp, I found a trunk filled with more notebooks, their pages damp and fragile. My uncle had filled them with observations, times and dates, sketches of shapes in the fog. One page was headed with bold handwriting. The Watchers. Beneath it were drawings of figures perched on rocks, figures with blank faces and hands too long. The notes said they came with the high tide, that they whispered through the walls, that they wanted to be let in. I closed the trunk and shoved it back where I had found it. But I couldn't ignore the noises that grew louder each night. The knocks had changed. Instead of 3, they now came in sequences that mimicked human speech, like someone trying to form words by tapping. Sometimes, in the moments between, I heard faint laughter. On the 7th night, I woke to find the bedroom colder than any winter I remembered. The window was fogged on the inside, and when I wiped it with my sleeve, I saw faces looking in from the darkness, pale, featureless, pressed close to the glass as though the ocean itself had risen up to watch me. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but when I blinked, the faces were gone. Only the endless fog remained. The next morning I noticed something else. The lighthouse beam, which had always swept steadily across the sea, had stopped. It was fixed in place, pointing inland, as though illuminating the forest behind the house rather than the water. I hadn't touched the controls. I still didn't even know how they worked. Yet the beam held its position, and in its pale glow, the edge of the trees seemed to ripple, as though something inside them had moved closer. I told myself this was only the beginning of my stay, that I had many months ahead, and I had to learn how to live with the strangeness. But even then, in those early days, a part of me knew I had made a mistake. The lighthouse wasn't just strange. It was watching me back, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. The morning after the lighthouse beam froze, I went up the spiral stairs, determined to force it back into motion. Each step trembled under my weight, and I gripped the railing to steady myself. Though even the railing seemed faintly warm, as though it had a pulse of its own. When I reached the lantern room, the light swiveled slightly, then clicked to a stop again, still aimed at the inland woods. The gears groaned when I tried to turn them by hand, but they refused to budge. The glass where I'd seen the words, "Do not answer," had fogged overnight, though there had been no rain, and when I wiped it with my sleeve, I swore I saw fingerprints pressed against the other side. They were too long, the spread of each finger unnatural, and when I leaned closer they faded as though whatever made them had withdrawn back into the mist. I wanted to call someone, anyone, just to anchor myself back in reality, but the landline downstairs had gone silent. No static this time, no whisper of voices, just an empty hush that reminded me too much of the pause before the ocean sucks back for a wave. My uncle's notebooks haunted me. I tried not to open them again, but curiosity has claws, and one night I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with a candle, reading by its unsteady flame. He wrote in clipped sentences, like he didn't want to linger on the details. They come with the fog. They stand where the rocks bleed into the sea. They know names, and scrawled across multiple pages, repeated like a mantra, "Do not open the door when they knock." The trouble was, the knocks had grown bolder. They came earlier each night, sometimes as soon as dusk fell, and they weren't always confined to the front door anymore. Once, I heard them inside the kitchen walls, right behind the stove. Another time, they came from beneath the floorboards, directly under my bed. 3 slow raps, then silence, then 3 more as if waiting for a reply. I thought about leaving, of course. I could have packed the car and driven back to Boston, inheritance be damned. But something about the contract, the stipulation about staying a year, gnawed at me. It didn't just sound like legal red tape. It felt like a warning disguised as obligation. Like my uncle had known I couldn't run. That once I stepped into this place I was already bound. And there was something else, too, though I barely admitted it to myself. I wanted answers. If my family had carried this secret for generations, if the lighthouse wasn't just a building, but a kind of sentinel, then I wanted to understand what it was guarding against, or what it was guarding in. One evening after the sky collapsed into another slate, gray dusk, I carried one of the seawater jars out to the porch. I held it against the light, and what I saw inside made my skin crawl. A faint shape swirled in the water, like a figure suspended in miniature. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, its face blurred, but when I tilted the jar, the shape tilted too, as though it knew it was being observed. I nearly dropped it. Instead, I screwed the lid tighter and shoved it back inside with the others, all of them trembling faintly on the shelf, as though stirred by an unseen tide. That night the knocking came again, but this time it was accompanied by a voice. Faint at first, like wind through reeds, but it sharpened until it was unmistakable. It spoke my name, not just once, but again and again, testing the weight of it, sometimes drawn out, sometimes whispered fast like a secret. My uncle had written that no names, but knowing it and hearing it spoken from inside your own walls are 2 different things entirely. I sat in the dark, clutching a hammer I'd taken from the shed, though I knew it would do no good against whatever moved in the fog. When dawn came, I noticed something new. The forest behind the house looked closer, not just in the sense of perspective, closer, literally, as if the tree line had crept forward several yards overnight. Branches loomed where the open grass had been, needles brushing the edge of the porch rail. And within those trees, Shadows swayed though the wind was still. The lighthouse beam, fixed on the woods, seemed almost to be holding them back. A thin slice of light, pushing against something that wanted to cross. I spent the day searching the house for anything useful, something my uncle might have left behind. In a drawer of the desk upstairs, I found a small brass key wrapped in oilcloth. The tag tied to it read simply, "Basement." That startled me because I hadn't found any door leading down. I spent hours knocking on floors and walls until I discovered a trapdoor beneath the rug in the pantry. The key fit. The air that rose from below smelled like brine and rust. I lit a lantern and descended narrow wooden steps into a space that shouldn't have existed. The lighthouse sat on solid stone, yet beneath it was a chamber carved deep into the rock. The walls sweated with moisture, and in the center of the floor stood a stone basin filled with seawater that shifted and swirled although there was no source feeding it. Around the basin, more jars lined the shelves, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some were cracked, their contents evaporated to leave behind faint salt stains. Others glowed faintly, the water within them shimmering as though stirred by invisible currents. On the far wall hung a board where slips of paper had been tacked with nails. Each paper held a single name, written in my uncle's cramped hand. Many had been crossed out with black ink, but the remaining ones filled almost the entire board. And at the very bottom, a fresh slip with my own name, Elias Harrow. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the lantern. My uncle had expected me. More than that, he had prepared for me, as though this place demanded a keeper, and I had been next in line whether I wanted it or not. I didn't touch anything else in that basement. I fled back upstairs, slamming the trapdoor closed and dragging the heaviest furniture I could find across it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light burning, listening to the knocks crawl from one wall to another, the voice whispering my name, until it dissolved into laughter. At some point I must have dozed, because I woke with my head against the arm of the chair and the room dark, though I knew I hadn't turned the lights off. The power had gone out, but the beam of the lighthouse still glared through the fog, cutting across the woods as if it ran on something older than electricity. In that half-dark, I heard footsteps across the porch. Not the shuffle of boots or shoes, but the deliberate slap of wet feet. They stopped just outside the door, and then the knock came again, slower this time, almost patient. I held my breath. The silence stretched, then a voice rasped through the keyhole. "You don't have to be alone." I wanted to scream, to tell it to leave, but the words died in my throat. The handle of the door jiggled once, then stilled. When I finally found the courage to look through the peephole, there was nothing there, only fog, thicker than ever, pressed against the glass. When dawn came, the tree line was closer again. The beam now barely reached them. And I had the sickening sense that the light wasn't going to hold forever. Whatever my uncle had been doing with the jars, with the basin in the basement, it had been keeping something at bay, and now it was my turn. I don't know what's waiting in those woods, or what rises from the sea when the fog rolls in. I only know that each night, the knocks grow bolder, the voices clearer, and the faces press closer to the glass. And every morning, I find my name written in places I never left it, scratched into the window frame, etched into the dust on the shelves, scrawled in charcoal across the bedroom wall. Always my full name, as if something is claiming it, as if something is claiming me. By the third week in the lighthouse, I stopped marking the days on the calendar. It was pointless. The fog smudged time into one long, gray smear, and the nights seemed to stretch until they swallowed the days whole. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of water pressing against glass, of whispers rising from the deep, of hands tapping in patient rhythm against walls that were too thin to keep them out. One morning, I woke to find the word open scratched into the condensation on my bedroom window. My pulse hammered so hard it hurt. I knew I hadn't done it. The letters were too sharp, too deliberate, and they were written from the outside. That was the first time I considered leaving seriously. Packing the car, driving until the fog let me go. But when I staggered outside to the driveway, the car was gone. Not stolen, not driven away. The gravel was undisturbed, no tire marks leading off. Just gone, as though it had never been there. I searched the cliffs, the rocks, even the narrow trail that led toward the woods, but there was no sign of it. And when I came back to the porch, winded and shaking, there was a new jar waiting on the step. It was identical to the others in the house, sealed glass, cloudy seawater sloshing faintly inside. But this one had no date, no label, only my name written in faded black ink across the lid. I didn't touch it. I kicked it into the grass, but when I checked later, it was back on the shelf in the living room with the others, lined neatly as though it had always belonged. After that, I couldn't avoid the basement any longer. I moved the furniture away from the trapdoor, unlocked it, and forced myself down those narrow stairs again. The basin still churned with its private tide, faint light shimmering across the walls, and the board of names. It had grown. Where there had been a single slip with my name at the bottom, there were now several, all identical, stacked in a column as if written again and again. Elias Harrow, Elias Harrow, Elias Harrow. I grabbed one of the slips and tore it down, crumpling it in my fist. The basin water swirled violently in response, slapping against the stone sides. I threw the paper into the flame of my lantern, watched it curl and blacken. But when I looked back at the board, the slip had returned, perfectly intact, pinned beside the others. My name multiplying like infection. That night, the knocks didn't stop. They started at sundown and went on until dawn, circling the house, migrating from door to door, wall to wall. Sometimes it was a polite rap, sometimes a thunderous pounding that shook the windows. The voice followed, whispering through cracks, cajoling, threatening, even laughing. At one point it said, very clearly, "We have your car. You don't need it anymore. Just open the door." I jammed earplugs in and wrapped a blanket over my head, but nothing kept it out. The words crawled under my skin, and I realized the worst part wasn't the threats. It was the temptation. Each night, the loneliness grew heavier, the walls smaller, and a part of me wanted to see what waited on the other side, if only to end the endless waiting. By dawn, I was delirious. I stumbled into the kitchen, desperate for water, and froze. Every jar on the shelves had turned cloudy, not with salt but with shapes. Tiny, distorted figures moved inside, pressing their palms against the glass, mouths open in silent screams. Some looked like they were trying to claw their way out. Others just watched me. I swept the whole row onto the floor, shattering them one by one. Seawater spilled across the boards, and in the echo of the shattering glass, I swear I heard faint cries rise into the air, carried away on a wind that wasn't there a moment before. The water seeped into the cracks of the floor and didn't stop. It kept rising, a thin stream trickling down into the pantry, slipping through the trapdoor to the basement. When I lifted the door, I saw the basin overflowing, water surging up its sides, spilling onto the floor like a tide breaking free. And beneath the roar of it, I heard something else, a chorus of voices, layered and low, speaking in unison. Not words I could understand, but something older, heavier, meant to be felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. I slammed the trapdoor shut and shoved the furniture back over it, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the key. The house smelled of brine for hours afterward, the kind of salt stink that sticks in the back of the throat. That night, the lighthouse beam faltered. For the first time, it dimmed, sputtering as though something had leaned against it, smothering the light. The woods surged closer in the darkness, their shadows spilling toward the house, like a tide of branches. I saw faces between the trunks, pale and watching, dozens of them where there had been only a few. They didn't move like animals or people. They swayed as though dragged on invisible currents. I tried to write everything down, thinking maybe if I kept a record I could make sense of it, tether myself to reality. But every page came out the same. No matter what words I tried to write, they bent into my name over and over, the ink curling into Elias Harrow, until the whole notebook was filled with it. I threw the pen across the room and ripped the pages out, but the words seemed burned into my vision, hovering even when I closed my eyes. At some point, exhaustion took me. I woke in the middle of the night to silence. No knocking, no voices, only the steady crash of the waves below. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then I noticed the bedroom window was open. I never opened it. The salt air warped the frame too much to close again. Yet there it was, gaping wide, the curtains stirring with the cold sea breeze. On the sill rested a wet handprint, too long, the fingers stretched unnaturally, pointing inward. I don't remember moving. One moment I was staring at the print. The next I was halfway down the spiral stairs of the lighthouse, lantern in hand. Something had pulled me there in my sleep, or something had led me there while I wasn't awake enough to resist. When I reached the lantern room, the glass was slick with condensation, and every pane bore the same message scratched into it, Elite USIN. The light sputtered again, then flared bright, almost blinding. In that flare, I saw them gathered on the rocks below. Dozens of figures, pale and glistening, their limbs too long, their faces blank smears. They swayed in perfect rhythm with the waves, as though the sea itself moved them. And as the beam swept over them, every head turned toward me at once. I staggered back, my breath tearing out of me. For the first time, I felt the house behind me shudder, not just from the wind, but as if something enormous had leaned against it, pressing inward. The knocks came again, shaking the whole tower, and this time there was no pause, no rhythm. Just a relentless pounding like the heartbeat of something vast. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the railing, eyes fixed on the sea. When dawn finally broke, the figures were gone, the rocks bare. The beam of the lighthouse had steadied, sweeping normally again, as though none of it had happened. But I knew better. I could feel it in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air itself. Something had shifted, something had thinned, and I realized then what my uncle had known all along: the lighthouse wasn't built to guide ships. It was built to keep the shore safe from what waits in the fog. And now, the light was failing. The day after I saw the figures gathered on the rocks, I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. Every time I went near a window, I thought I saw shapes moving in the fog, like the afterimage of something I shouldn't have stared at too long. The ocean had always been loud, but that day it roared, waves breaking harder against the cliffs, sending spray high enough to coat the glass. It sounded less like surf and more like breathing, long, deliberate, in and out. I kept pacing between rooms, unable to rest. The jars of seawater, even the ones I had shattered and swept aside, had returned to their shelves. I counted them 3 times. Each one seemed fuller than before, the tiny shapes inside clearer now. Not vague shadows anymore, but figures that looked almost human, pressed against the glass with faces twisted in silent pleas. Their mouths opened and closed like fish gasping for air, though there was no air in those jars, only the shifting tide. By afternoon, I worked up the nerve to return to the basement. The trapdoor groaned as I pulled it open, and the smell of salt rushed up, choking me. The basin had risen again. water sloshing against the stone rim, and on the board, my name filled nearly every slip. I stared at it for a long time, numb, until I noticed something new pinned at the top. A note written in a different hand, shakier, messier, as though scrawled in haste. It read, "You cannot win, but you can last. Keep the light burning. Do not speak to them. Do not give them your name." It wasn't my uncle's handwriting. I didn't know whose it was. The ink looked fresh, as if someone had placed it there only hours ago. My skin crawled with the thought that whoever had written it might still be near. That night, the knocking began again, but not at the door. It came from inside the lighthouse tower, echoing down the spiral stairs. Each metallic clang reverberated through the walls, vibrating the air, until the lantern above me shook in its frame. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself up the steps. My breath ragged, each footfall louder than it should have been. When I reached the lantern room, the knocking stopped. Silence pressed against the glass until my ears rang. I told myself it was just the storm, the metal expanding, the sea pounding below. Then I saw the condensation on the inside of the glass again. A single word written large enough to span 3 panes, tone and IGHT. I stumbled back down the stairs, nearly falling in my panic. I locked myself in the bedroom and pushed the dresser against the door, though I knew wood wouldn't stop. Whatever had scratched words into glass, the silence didn't last. Around midnight, the voices began again. Not whispers this time, but a chorus, dozens of them overlapping. Some wept, some laughed. Some called my name over and over until it lost all meaning. And beneath it all, one voice rose clearer, steadier, like the leader of a chant. It said, "Your uncle failed. You will fail too." The dresser rattled as though something pressed against the other side. I pressed my back to it, hammer in hand, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. For hours it went on, until the first gray light of dawn bled through the curtains. And just like that, silence, as though nothing had happened. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke with the taste of salt on my lips, my clothes damp as though I had been swimming. When I sat up, the floorboards beneath the bed creaked, and I saw dark water seeping between them. I yanked the rug back and found fresh cracks radiating outward, water trickling through like veins. The trapdoor to the basement bulged upward slightly, the wood swollen, and I heard a faint sloshing beneath it, as though the sea itself had risen into the foundation. I shoved the furniture back over it, but it was useless. The water was coming whether I blocked it or not. Later, when I tried to write down what had happened, I noticed the notebook had changed again. No matter what I wrote, the letters twisted into something else. Not just my name this time, but words I didn't recognize. Jagged shapes that hurt my eyes to read. I tore the pages out and threw them into the stove. The fire burned hotter than it should have, crackling blue, and when the smoke rose, I thought I saw faces in it, screaming silently as they dissolved into ash. That night, I made a mistake. I spoke back. The knocking came as it always did, patient and deliberate, but I was too raw, too frayed by fear and exhaustion. When the voice whispered my name, I snapped. "What do you want from me?" I shouted into the dark. The answer came instantly. A dozen voices at once, everything. The house shook, the windows rattled in their frames, and for the first time I heard the door latch snap upward, as though something on the other side had tried it. I threw myself against the wood, forcing it closed, shoving the bolt back into place with trembling hands. I stayed there all night, back against the door, hammer ready, while the voices circled, laughing, promising things I didn't dare listen to. By morning, I was broken. My reflection in the mirror startled me, sunken eyes, pale skin, a mouth that looked too wide, like I'd been stretched. My uncle's jacket still hung by the door, stiff with salt, and for the first time, I wondered how long he had lasted before it ended. I wondered if he had screamed, if he had begged them to stop. The car was gone. The phone was dead. The jars multiplied no matter how many I destroyed. But the lighthouse beam still swept the horizon, steady and unwavering. It was the only thing keeping them back. That thought anchored me. Whatever else happened, I had to keep the light burning. If it failed, if it dimmed again, I knew the figures in the woods and the ones in the sea would converge, and there would be no house left to hide in. That evening, I forced myself up the spiral stairs again, checking every gear, every lever, every switch I could find. The machinery was old, rusted, but still working. It ran on something deeper than electricity. I could feel it in the hum of the walls, in the way the beam pulsed like a heartbeat. I pressed my hand against the glass, whispering to it like a prayer, "Stay alive. Just stay alive." The fog pressed close that night, thicker than ever, wrapping the house in silence so deep it felt suffocating. And then the knocking began again, louder than it had ever been. Not from the door, not from the walls, but from the glass of the lantern room itself, hundreds of feet above the ground. I looked up through the tower window and saw pale shapes clinging to the outside of the glass, their hands smearing the panes with seawater. Their faces leaned close, blank and eyeless, whispering my name with mouths that didn't move. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, and prayed the light would hold. For hours the pounding went on, until just before dawn, when the beam flared bright, searing the fog away in a single sweep. The figures peeled off the glass, vanishing into the mist, and silence fell again. But I knew then what the note had meant. I could not win. The light might hold for a time, but each night they grew bolder, hungrier, closer. My uncle had lasted as long as he could, and then it had been my turn. And after me, who would the lighthouse claim next? I stopped counting the days entirely. The calendar meant nothing. The clock meant nothing. The light above dictated everything. When it swept steady, I felt like I had a little longer. When it faltered, when it dimmed, every muscle in my body tensed. Waiting for the knocking, waiting for the voices. I started hearing them even in daylight. Not the loud chorus of night, but faint murmurs carried on the wind, buried beneath the crash of the waves. Sometimes I thought they were saying my name, other times fragments of sentences. "Let go, join us, the water remembers." I tried to drown them out with music, but the radio in the house only produced static. In that static, sometimes I thought I could make out singing. One morning, I found the front door standing open. I knew I had locked it the night before. I had checked the bolt 3 times, even dragged the dresser back against it before trying to sleep. But now it gaped wide, and the wood around the frame was wet, dark as though something had pressed against it for hours. The jars on the shelf were rearranged. Some were stacked in neat pyramids, others lined in spirals. The one with my name was front and center, rocking faintly even though the air was still. I carried it outside, determined to smash it against the rocks. But when I reached the cliff's edge, my arms locked up. I couldn't move. My fingers stiffened around the glass, my body seizing like a puppet held by invisible strings. And in my head, not in my ears, but inside, I heard a voice, "Break it, and you break yourself." The jar pulsed warm in my hands, as if blood beat within it. I dropped to my knees, gasping, and only when I stumbled back into the house did the paralysis ease. The jar was still whole, still rocking faintly on the shelf. That night, I tried something different. I stayed awake in the lantern room, lantern by my side, notebook open. I told myself I would face them, that if they knocked I would see what they wanted instead of hiding behind locked doors like a child. The fog thickened until the beam looked like it was shining into a wall, the glass fogged with condensation. And then softly the knocks began, Not at the door, not even at the walls, but directly behind me against the iron floor. I froze. It was impossible. No one could be beneath me in the lantern room. Still, the knocks went on. 3 slow raps, then silence. Then 3 again. I forced myself to turn and nearly dropped the lantern. A figure crouched in the far corner of the room. Its skin was slick and pale, glistening as though dredged from the sea. Its limbs bent wrong, knees backward, fingers too long. The face was a blur, features smudged as though erased. And yet when it leaned forward, I knew it was staring directly at me. It whispered my name. Once, and the lantern flame shuddered as if the word itself had weight. I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted. But the moment I opened my mouth, the air thickened, brine flooding my throat. I choked, staggered, and when I blinked, the corner was empty again. Only condensation on the glass remained, shaped into the words sewn. I fled back down the stairs, but the echoes followed me. Each footstep reverberated longer than it should, multiplying until it sounded like dozens of feet rushing just behind me. By the time I slammed the trapdoor to my bedroom and curled against the dresser, I was sobbing, the hammer slipping from my hands. When dawn came, I found footprints on the spiral stairs. Wet, too long, each print leaving behind streaks of salt that glittered in the morning light. I started seeing changes in myself. At first I thought it was exhaustion, the shadows under my eyes, the tremor in my hands. But then I noticed my reflection. My face was thinner, my eyes sunken deeper, and when I leaned closer to the mirror, my pupils looked too large, swallowing the iris. My skin tasted of salt when I licked my lips. Sometimes my breath missed it even when the room was warm, and once, when I coughed, a trickle of seawater spilled from the corner of my mouth. The basement called to me. I tried to ignore it, but I dreamed of the basin, of slipping beneath its surface, of joining the whispers that swirled there. When I woke, I'd find myself standing above the trapdoor, hand on the key in my pocket. I started sleeping with the key locked in a drawer, but somehow it always ended up back in my hand when I woke. One evening, while rummaging through the desk again, I found a letter wedged deep in the back of a drawer. It was addressed to me, though the ink was faded, the paper warped by moisture. It was my uncle's writing this time. Elias, if you are reading this, then you have already seen them. They will take pieces of you night by night. You will change. That is their way. I tried to fight it, but I failed. Do not trust the jars. Do not drink the water. Do not answer when they knock. When the light falters, you must give it blood. It will not burn on its own forever. If you starve it, the sea will claim everything. The letter ended there, torn at the edge as though the rest had been destroyed. I stared at it for hours. Blood. My uncle had been feeding the lighthouse blood. That's why the machinery never failed, why the beam pulsed like a heartbeat. The thought made me sick, but at the same time, it explained everything. The light wasn't a machine. It was alive, or at least tethered to something that lived. And it was hungry. That night, when the beam flickered again, I cut my palm with a kitchen knife and smeared the blood across the iron gears in the lantern room. The light flared bright instantly, sweeping strong across the fog, and the knocking outside ceased as though someone had snapped their fingers. Relief swept through me so strong I nearly collapsed. For the first time in weeks, the voices went silent, but the silence didn't last. I woke the next morning with the taste of rust in my mouth, my lips cracked, my veins throbbing. The cut on my palm had healed already, leaving behind faint lines like scales. The jars on the shelves rattled, the shapes inside pressing harder against the glass. One jar had cracked slightly, salt water seeping down the wood. I knew then that I hadn't bought safety. I had bought time, and time was running out. By the 5th week, I began hearing footsteps in the house during the day. Slow, deliberate, as though someone were pacing the hallways while I sat frozen in the kitchen. Once, I saw the doorknob twist. Another time, I heard breathing outside the bathroom door while I showered. Heavy, wet breathing, matching the rhythm of the tide. The forest behind the house had crept so close that the branches scraped the windows. In daylight, I could see pale shapes swaying among the trunks, motionless until the beam of the lighthouse swept past, driving them back a little. But the beam was weaker now. I could see it dim with each pass, its edges fraying. And in the basin below in the basement, the water had risen nearly to the rim. When I dared to peer inside, I saw faces swirling within it, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes rolling upward. One face was unmistakable, my uncle's, eyes wide, lips mouthing a single word over and over. Run! I staggered back, but where could I run? The car was gone, the phone was dead, and the forest and sea pressed in on all sides. The lighthouse was no sanctuary anymore. It was a trap, and I was the bait it demanded. That night, the voices didn't whisper, they shouted. Hundreds of them shaking the walls, rattling the glass, pounding in perfect rhythm with the waves. The jars shattered one by one, seawater flooding the floor, and the figures inside spilled out like smoke, swarming the house. I screamed, slashing at the air with my hammer, but the shapes passed through me, chilling me to the marrow. I fled to the lantern room, blood running from my nose, coughing seawater with every breath. The beam sputtered, dimmer than ever, and the word appeared on the glass again, Nanodabu. I pressed my bleeding hands to the gears, begging the light to hold. For a moment, it flared, brighter than ever, burning through the fog, scattering the figures. But in the flare, I saw something vast beneath the sea, rising, stretching long arms toward the shore. Bigger than the lighthouse, bigger than the cliffs. A shape older than memory, and it was coming closer. The beam held for only seconds, but in those seconds I saw the truth. The things in the fog weren't the threat. They were its shadows, fragments of something deeper, something that lived in the ocean beneath me. The vast shape I glimpsed rising in the water, its arms long enough to drag ships under like toys, its face hidden but vast and endless. That was what the lighthouse was meant to hold back. Every knock, every whisper, every pale figure pressed against the glass was just a fingertip testing the cracks, a ripple from what lay below. When the light dimmed again, the sea roared with laughter. I heard it clearly, a chorus that shook the cliffs and rattled the windows. I stumbled back from the lens, blood dripping from my palms, every nerve in my body screaming that I couldn't hold this thing back much longer. I made it down the spiral stairs, just as the knocking began again. Not polite this time. Not patient. The entire house shook with it. Windows shattered, glass exploding inward, curtains flapping in a gale that reeked of salt and rot. The floorboards bowed, as though something massive pressed against them from beneath. I tried to barricade the door again, but the wood splintered under each slam, cracks spiderwebbing outward. The jars had all shattered by then, flooding the house ankle, deep with seawater. Shapes swam in it, darting between my legs, brushing cold against my skin. Some of them had faces I recognized, faces from old family photographs, faces I thought long dead. My uncle's among them, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to warn me, though I couldn't hear the words. I knew then that I couldn't keep the light alive on my own. It needed more than blood. It needed a life. My uncle must have known it too, in the end. That was why the inheritance came with its condition, 1 year. 1 year to keep it burning before the ocean claimed me, and the lighthouse claimed someone new. The voices pressed harder, their chorus swelling until my skull felt like it would split. Elias Harrow, Elias Harrow, Elias Harrow. Over and over, dragging my name through the walls, searing it into the glass, chanting it until I could barely remember who I was without them. I don't remember choosing to open the trapdoor, but suddenly I was there, lantern in hand, descending into the basement. The basin had overflowed completely, seawater pouring across the stone floor, rising to my ankles. The slips of paper with my name had multiplied until the board was covered in them, overlapping, hundreds deep. And in the water itself, faces churned. Dozens, maybe hundreds, mouths open in a silent scream that shook the air. I should have run. I should have fought. But instead I stepped into the basin. The water closed over me, icy, burning alive. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, but the voices filled me, bursting behind my eyes. They weren't calling my name anymore. They were calling me home. For a moment, I understood everything. The lighthouse wasn't just a warning. It was a seal, a lock, a prison balanced on the cliffs. The light was its heartbeat, its tether. The blood fed it. The keepers were sacrifices. My uncle had been one, and now it was my turn. I don't know how long I was under. When I gasped awake, I was back on the stone floor of the basement, the water receding around me. My lungs burned, salt stung my throat, but I was alive. The slips of paper had been washed from the board, every one of them gone. Only a single new note remained, pinned dead center, written in bold, sharp letters IUROURS. I staggered upstairs, shivering, drenched. The house was still flooded, seawater lapping at the walls, but the knocking had stopped. The voices had fallen silent. The light above swept steady again, its glow stronger than ever, slicing through the fog as though mocking the darkness itself. For the first time since I had arrived, the forest seemed to retreat, the shadows withdrawing, the faces vanishing from the trees. But I understood the cost. The light would keep burning, yes. The ocean would be held back, yes. But I wasn't free anymore. I felt it in my veins, the way my blood pulsed in rhythm with the beam above. I felt it in my skin, tight and itching as though it no longer fit me. When I looked in the mirror, my eyes glistened with a sheen I couldn't blink away, like scales forming beneath the surface. Days passed, maybe weeks, I can't tell anymore, and the routine settled in. At night, the voices don't beg me to open the door. They whisper to me now, soft and coaxing, teaching me their language, syllables that taste of salt when I speak them aloud. When I cut myself to feed the light, I don't feel pain anymore. The wounds close instantly, and the blood flows easier, eager, as though it knows where it belongs. The jars have returned, neatly lined on the shelf. Every one of them now holds a face I know. Some are strangers, some are family. One jar holds my uncle's face, finally at peace. And one jar, right in the center, holds my own. My reflection stares back at me through the glass, mouth opening and closing, gasping silently like all the others. I can't leave. The car will never come back. The phone will never ring. The forest would swallow me if I tried to run. The sea would drag me under if I tried to swim. The lighthouse is mine, and I am the lighthouse's. And when the year ends, when the inheritance cycle resets, someone else will come. Some cousin I've never met, or some distant hair plucked from a family tree they never cared about. They'll drive up the gravel road, see the beam sweeping through the fog, and wonder why the door is already open. And I will be waiting for them, because I hear the knocking now, too. Not outside the walls, but inside me. And when they arrive, when they step through that door, it won't be the ocean that welcomes them. It will be me. The lighthouse will never be empty again. My name is Rowan Keller, and I was born in a small Alaskan town that never appeared on most maps. It clung to the edge of a bay, where the mountains dipped down into the sea, ringed by spruce forests, so thick you could vanish within 20 paces. Life there was measured less by clocks and more by the tide, by the hiss of snowstorms, by the sound of things moving in the dark when you thought the wilderness should be still. Growing up in that place meant accepting certain truths. that winters were long, that neighbors were few, and that survival required obedience to rules older than memory. There were 5 rules that defined the town, written not in books, but spoken from parent to child, reinforced by looks exchanged over dinner tables and warnings whispered before sleep. I learned them as naturally as I learned my own name, and I lived beneath their weight for as long as I can remember. The first rule was never go into the forest alone. The second was do not whistle after sunset. The third was keep your doors locked, even if you were home. The fourth was never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. And the fifth, the one none of us spoke of without unease, was that if you ever saw a second moon rise over the bay, you must hide and not come out until dawn. These rules were not explained to us. They were handed down as fact, and it was considered foolish, even dangerous, to question them. In a place where every mistake could cost your life, whether to frostbite or thin ice or something older, children learned early that trust in the rules meant survival. I was 8 when I first asked my father about them. He was a broad, shouldered man with a face weathered by salt air and cold wind. His beard often rimmed in frost even inside the cabin. He did not scare easily, which made his silence more frightening than any words might have been. I remember sitting at the rough wooden table in our kitchen, the oil lamp flickering as the storm rattled the shutters. I asked why we could not whistle at night, why the sound of a tune could matter when the wind itself howled through the trees. My father's eyes shifted to the window, though the curtains were drawn. After a long pause, he said, "Because it whistles back, and it doesn't stop." Then he set down his cup of coffee, ended the conversation, and left me staring at the lamplight trembling on the walls. Our town was small enough that I knew every face, every voice. There were perhaps 60 of us, a collection of families bound by blood, necessity, and the weight of isolation. The nearest road ended 40 miles south, cut off by snowdrifts most of the year. Supply planes came when the weather allowed, but often weeks passed without any sign of the outside world. We learned to hunt, to fish, to mend what broke with whatever scraps were available. The rules bound us together, even as they set us apart from every place else. I grew up surrounded by silence deeper than any city could understand. Silence broken sometimes by sounds that carried too far through the trees, sounds you learn not to name. My earliest memory of fear came one autumn evening when I was 9. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air sharp with the scent of dying leaves. I was walking home from my friend Isaac's house, following the narrow trail along the edge of the bay. The water reflected the fading light, rippling like molten glass. I was humming without thinking, some nonsense tune picked up from Isaac's younger sister, when I caught myself and stopped cold. The sun had dipped below the horizon minutes earlier. My breath froze in front of me. I had been whistling after dark. The silence that followed was unbearable. I swear the trees grew closer in that moment, their shadows thickening. Then, from somewhere behind me, the exact notes I had just whistled drifted back, soft and deliberate, as though the forest itself had learned my song. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look behind me. When I burst through the cabin door, my father locked it without a word. But the look he gave me was worse than any scolding. He knew what I had heard, and he knew it had heard me. The years that followed deepened my understanding of the rules, though no one ever explained them directly. It was in the stories shared at the edges of gatherings, in the sudden silences that fell when questions were asked. I overheard enough to piece together fragments. A man who went into the forest alone one winter and never came back, though his axe was found upright in the snow. A woman who answered a voice calling her name from the tree line and returned home with eyes that no longer recognized her children. A fisherman who left his door unlocked one night, his body discovered by morning with the expression of someone who had seen something so vast, so incomprehensible, that fear was etched into his bones. Each rule had its proof, scattered across the whispered history of our people, and though some doubted, no one dared break them twice. I grew older, restless like any teenager trapped at the end of the world. By the time I was 15, I wanted more than the bay, more than the mountains that penned us in. I wanted roads, light, music that wasn't filtered through static on a battery radio. Isaac and I would sit on the cliffs and talk about leaving, about what lay beyond the forests and storms. Yet even as I dreamed, I could not shake the pull of the rules. They had been carved into me like the grain of wood. Sometimes, when the night was still, I would imagine testing them. Whistling, answering, walking into the trees. But something always stopped me, something like an invisible hand on my shoulder, a warning that curiosity here was more lethal than hunger or cold. The fifth rule remained the most mysterious. I had never seen a second moon, though I often stared at the sky in secret, half hoping, half terrified that I might. The adults spoke of it less than the others, but when it was mentioned, faces tightened, eyes dropped. Once, on a rare summer night when the sun lingered almost until morning, my mother whispered to my father that she prayed the sky would stay clear. He hushed her, but his grip on her wrist betrayed his fear. It was enough to plant the seed in me, the understanding that there were things above us as dangerous as those below. By 17, I had begun keeping a journal, though paper was scarce. I wrote what I remembered, what I suspected. I wrote about the way tracks sometimes appeared on the snow that did not match any animal we knew, long strides that vanished into frozen air. I wrote about the voices that carried across the bay when the fog was thick, voices speaking words that sounded familiar yet twisted, as if hearing my own language through broken glass. I wrote about the night Isaac swore he saw a figure standing in the surf, motionless as the tide swallowed its legs. We went down to look in the morning, but the only thing left was a single line of wet footprints that ended abruptly at the tree line. The rules kept us alive, but they also trapped us. I knew that even as I obeyed them, even as I grew into a man shaped by their shadow, there was a part of me that wanted to rebel, that wanted to know whether the threats were real or the invention of frightened ancestors. But every time I stood at the edge of breaking one, the memory of that whistle coming back to me stopped my breath. Something was out there. Something that did not just watch us but learned from us, imitated us. Something that wanted us to forget the rules. I realize now, looking back, that the town's silence was not born of ignorance but of survival. We did not speak of what we saw, because naming it gave it weight, made it stronger. The rules were our only defense, and even those were fragile. It was inevitable that someone would break them. It was inevitable that I would learn what lay behind them. That realization would not come until the winter I turned 18, when the second moon finally rose over the bay. But the path to that night began much earlier, with small cracks in the silence, small temptations that led me closer and closer to the edge. Even now, I can hear the echo of my own whistle drifting back through the years, reminding me that the forest never forgot me and never will. The winter of my 18th year came down hard and early. By October, the bay was already freezing over, the ice crusting white against the shoreline, and the sky hung low and gray like a lid pressing down on us. I had grown used to the weight of winters, but that season felt different, sharper somehow, like every shadow cut deeper, every silence lingered longer. People in town seemed restless. Arguments broke out over nothing. The old men who normally laughed at the trading post spoke in low, clipped tones. Isaac told me he'd caught his father staring at the sky for hours, muttering under his breath. The air felt charged, as though the rules themselves were waiting to be broken. It was Isaac who first pushed me toward testing them. We were walking along the cliff ridge one afternoon, bundled against the cold, our boots crunching in the snow. The sun was setting, the light bleeding red across the ice. He turned to me suddenly, eyes bright against the pale of his skin, and said, "What if it's all just stories, Rowan? What if they made it up so we wouldn't wander off or get into trouble?" His words hung there, dangerous and enticing. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to remind him of what I had heard that night when I was 9, but my mouth stayed closed. I realized, with a sort of dread, that I didn't want to prove him wrong. I wanted to know if he was right. The chance came 2 nights later. Isaac arrived at my cabin after supper, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his voice carrying a reckless edge. "Let's go into the forest," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder though no one was there. "Just for an hour. We won't go far." My first instinct was to refuse, to remind him of the first rule, but he pressed on. "We'll be together. That's not alone. The rules won't care." He laughed, though it sounded more like nerves than humor. Against every instinct drilled into me since childhood, I agreed. We told our parents we were checking the traps near the ridge, and once their backs were turned, we slipped into the tree line with only lanterns and our coats. The forest swallowed us whole. The snow muffled our steps, and the lanterns threw long shadows across the trunks. My breath fogged in the air, drifting upward like smoke. I felt exposed, as though the very act of walking there was a confession, an invitation for something to notice us. Isaac, bold as always, hummed under his breath. I nearly slapped him. "Don't," I hissed. "Not after dark." He smirked but fell silent, though I could see the defiance in his posture. We walked for what felt like forever, though in truth it was probably less than half an hour. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest felt. The trees seemed closer together, the paths unfamiliar, though I knew these woods as well as my own heartbeat. The lantern light caught on ice that shimmered like eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were being followed. We stopped in a small clearing, the snow untouched, the silence absolute. Isaac grinned at me, breath puffing from his mouth like smoke signals. "See, nothing, just trees." He lifted his lantern high, casting the light farther into the woods. For a moment I believed him. For a moment I thought, maybe all the rules were just cages built out of fear. Then something moved at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. Branches swaying, shadows shifting. But it stepped forward, and I saw legs. Human legs, pale against the dark. The figure stopped just beyond the glow of our lanterns, and though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was watching us. My throat closed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs locked in place. Isaac whispered, "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head in a way that was both curious and unnatural, like a bird mimicking a human gesture. Then it called my name. Not in a stranger's voice, but in my mother's. The exact pitch, the exact softness she used when waking me as a child. "Rowan," it said, and the sound cut through me like a blade. I wanted to run, but my body betrayed me. One step forward, then another. The rules roared in my head. Never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. Isaac grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Don't," he hissed, his eyes wide with terror. The figure stepped closer, just enough for the light to brush its face. It was me, my own face staring back, pale and hollow-eyed, the smile stretched too wide, my reflection in the snow come to life. I think I screamed. Isaac yanked me backward, and we both bolted, crashing through the trees, branches tearing at our coats. The forest howled behind us, not voices, not footsteps, but something like both, chasing us all the way to the cabin lights. We slammed the door shut, panting, our hearts hammering. My father's face when he saw us said everything. He knew what we had done. He locked the door, drew the curtains, and didn't speak a word. That night I lay awake listening. Outside, something walked past our cabin, slow and deliberate. It whistled my tune. After that night, Isaac and I barely spoke of what we had seen, but it lived between us like a secret too large to hide. He claimed it was just a trick of the light, nerves, imagination. I wanted to believe him, but I remembered the shape of my own face staring at me from the shadows. The rules were not cages. They were chains keeping something out, or maybe keeping us in. The town changed that winter. More arguments, more disappearances. Old Mrs. Harrow, who lived alone by the southern cliffs, vanished one morning, her door found wide open, frost creeping across the threshold. A boy named Caleb swore he saw 2 moons one night, though when he told his parents, they beat him for lying. He left town a week later, his sled dogs carrying him into the storm. We never saw him again. Fear seeped into every corner. People locked themselves inside earlier and earlier, lamps burning late into the night. The silence grew heavier, until even speaking felt dangerous. It was mid-January when the 5th rule came for me. I was chopping wood behind our cabin, the sky clear for once, the stars sharp and bright. The air was brittle, so cold it hurt to breathe. As I straightened, I glanced toward the horizon. At first I thought my eyes had blurred from the cold. The moon hung low above the bay, full and silver, its light skating across the ice. But beside it, slightly higher, was another. Dimmer, tinged faintly red, but unmistakably a second moon. My axe slipped from my hands. I stood frozen, my breath loud in the silence. I remembered the rule, if you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. But my legs didn't move. My chest felt caged. I couldn't look away. From the tree line, shapes began to emerge. Dozens of them, maybe more. Some tall, some small, their outlines flickering as though they were half shadow, half flesh. They gathered at the edge of the clearing, standing still as statues, their faces turned up toward the sky. Then, in eerie unison, they turned toward me. The second moon burned redder, and every shape opened its mouth in silence. No sound came, yet my head filled with a ringing so sharp, I thought my skull would split. I staggered backward, stumbled into the cabin, slammed the door, and dropped the bar across it. My parents were at the table, their faces pale, their hands clutching each other. They had seen it too. My father whispered, "Hide." That was all. We doused the lamps, pulled the blankets over the windows, and crouched in the dark as the ringing grew louder. All through that night, I heard them outside, their footsteps in the snow, circling the cabin, their voices calling my name in every tone I had ever known. My mother's, my father's, Isaac's, even my own. Sometimes 2 voices at once, overlapping in impossible harmony. The second moon blood red light through the cracks in the shutters, painting the walls with shifting shapes. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it wasn't enough. The voices weren't in the air, they were inside me. I don't know how we lasted until dawn, but when the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountains, the voices stopped. I looked outside. The second moon was gone. The snow in the clearing was marked with hundreds of footprints, none leading in, none leading out. That was the night I stopped believing the rules were just survival. They were warnings. They were boundaries keeping us sane. And now I knew what happened when the 5th one was broken. The morning after the second moon disappeared, the town was changed forever. You could feel it in the air, the way people moved faster and spoke less, the way every door stayed locked even in daylight. We gathered at the trading post, as we often did after storms or strange nights, though no one wanted to look each other in the eye. The elders stood near the stove, their hands trembling as they poured coffee, their voices hushed. Isaac found me by the barrels of salt fish, his face pale, his eyes wide like he hadn't slept at all. "You saw it too," he whispered. It wasn't a question. I nodded, and that was enough. For the first time, I realized none of us could pretend anymore. The rules weren't just words to keep children quiet. They were a fragile dam against something vast, and the cracks were showing. That day passed in silence, and the next, and the next. But the snow carried marks that shouldn't have been there. Deep strides across frozen drifts where no man could walk without sinking. Circles burned into the ice as though from a heat no fire we knew could make. Dogs howled at nothing, then refused to leave their kennels. The forest felt closer, pressing in. At night, even with the shutters drawn, I swore I saw faces staring through the cracks. Faces like mine, but twisted, stretched wrong. I stopped writing in my journal. The words felt dangerous, like they might call something closer if I gave them shape. By February, people began to vanish. Not just wander into the snow and never return, though that happened too, but vanish in ways that defied reason. One evening, Isaac's uncle went to fetch water from the well. His wife heard the bucket hit the ice, heard his boots crunching, and then nothing. When she opened the door, the rope was swinging, the bucket frozen, and the snow was smooth and untouched all around. No footprints, no trace. The next morning, the school teacher disappeared from her cabin. Her lantern still burned, her coat hung by the door. Her bed was empty, but the sheets were warm. We stopped speaking of it out loud, but every loss was a wound we all carried. The town was unraveling thread by thread. My father grew quieter with each passing day. He had always been a man of few words, but now he barely spoke at all, except to remind us of the rules. "Don't go alone," he told me every time I stepped outside, even if I was just going to the woodpile. "Don't whistle. Don't answer. Don't forget." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before, as though he knew something worse was coming. My mother lit candles at night and prayed, though I don't think to God. She whispered words I didn't understand, words her grandmother had taught her, and her hands shook as she spoke them. Then, one night, Isaac came to me again. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice carried a feverish determination. "Rowan," he said, "we can't stay here. You know it. The rules aren't enough anymore. Whatever's out there, it's stronger than them now. If we don't leave, we'll end up like the others." He wanted to take the sled dogs, to follow the frozen river south until we reached the roads. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe escape was possible. But even as he spoke, I remembered Caleb, who had left with his dogs and vanished into the storm. I remembered the second moon rising over the bay, how it had watched us, how it had known me by name. I told Isaac no. His face twisted, part anger, part despair. "Then I'll go without you," he said, and he did. I never saw him again. The next morning, his dogs returned, all of them. Their harnesses were still strapped tight, the traces dragging behind them, but they carried no sled. Their fur was wet, as if they had walked through water, though the river was frozen solid. They would not go near Isaac's cabin. When I tried, my father held me back. "He's gone," he said flatly, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Don't look for him." I wanted to argue, to scream, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. Isaac had broken the rules, the one that was never spoken aloud, but lived inside all of us. You don't leave. The forest does not let you. The days blurred after that. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember eating. I remember the sound of voices outside the cabin at night, sometimes in the wind, sometimes just beyond the door. Always calling my name, always waiting. Once, I woke to find the latch on the window unhooked, though I knew I had fastened it tight. Frost rimmed the glass in the shape of a handprint, larger than any man's. Another night, I heard my father's voice outside, soft, insistent. "Rowan, come help me." But my father was asleep beside me, his chest rising and falling. I pressed my hands over my ears until the sound faded. It was the end of February when the second moon rose again. I had prayed I would never see it, but prayers meant nothing there. This time, it came higher, brighter, its red light staining the snow like blood. The air vibrated, the ringing starting low and growing until it was all I could hear. My father pulled me and my mother into the cellar, shutting the heavy trapdoor, bolting it tight. We huddled in the dark as the walls shook. The voices came again, dozens, maybe hundreds, all calling my name, all urging me to open the door. Some were pleading, some angry, some coaxing, some cruel. They spoke in every voice I had ever known, and some I hadn't. I felt them pressing down, trying to peel me open, trying to pull me upward into that red light. We lasted until dawn, but dawn didn't bring safety anymore. When we climbed back out, the town was silent. Cabins stood with doors wide, windows shattered. Smoke no longer rose from chimneys. No voices, no dogs, no people. Just emptiness. My father searched the nearest houses, but they were all the same. Meals half-eaten, lamps still burning, beds warm. The town was hollow, as though its life had been sucked out in one night. We were alone. For 3 days, we tried to stay. We kept the lamps lit, the doors locked, the rules sharp in our minds. But each night, the voices grew louder, closer. I began to see them in the corners of the room. Shapes flickering in the lamplight, always watching, always smiling. My father grew thinner, my mother weaker, and I knew we couldn't last. On the 4th morning, my father made the decision. "We're leaving," he said. His voice was steady, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "We'll follow the bay south until we find another town. We can't stay here anymore." We packed what little we could carry: food, blankets, a rifle, my journal. My father hitched the dogs to the sled, and we left at dawn. The snow was deep, the cold biting, but the world felt strangely still. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of runners over ice. The town disappeared behind us, swallowed by the trees. I didn't look back. We traveled for hours, the sun crawling across the horizon. I began to think for a moment that maybe we could escape, that maybe the rules had limits, that whatever haunted us was bound to that cursed place. Then, as the light began to fade, I looked up. 2 moons hung above the bay, side by side, one silver, one red. My stomach dropped. The rules had followed us. Or maybe they had never belonged to the town at all. Maybe they belonged to me. The moment I saw the second moon above us, I knew there was no outrunning it. My breath caught in my chest, and the sled lurched as the dogs slowed, whining low in their throats. They saw it too. The red light poured over the snow, staining the drifts as though blood seeped through from beneath. My father shouted at the dogs, his voice sharp and urgent, but they refused to move forward. They turned in circles, yelping, tails tucked. My mother clutched my arm so tightly her nails broke the skin through my sleeve. "Rowan," she whispered, "don't look at it." But I couldn't help myself. My eyes locked on the sky, on those 2 moons staring down like watchful eyes, one familiar, one wrong. The ringing started again, faint at first, then swelling until it filled every corner of me. I thought my bones might crack beneath the pressure. My father leapt from the sled, pulling the dogs by their harnesses, dragging them forward through the snow. "Keep your head down," he shouted. His voice sounded far away, as though muffled by the ringing. I bent low, forcing my gaze to the white ground, watching my boots sink into the crusted snow with each step. The rules repeated themselves in my head like a prayer. Don't answer. Don't whistle. Don't look back. I clung to them, as if they were the only thing tethering me to this world. My mother's grip tightened, her breath ragged beside me. Together we stumbled onward, the sled dragging behind, the dogs straining against something I could not see. We walked like that for hours, or maybe only minutes. Time bent beneath the red moon. I began to see shapes moving in the snow beside us. Not footprints, but impressions. Depressions forming and vanishing as though something invisible walked alongside. Sometimes they were large, too large for any human. Sometimes they were small, like a child's, though no child would ever have walked there. My skin prickled with cold sweat, and I forced myself not to look up. I knew if I met their eyes, if they even had eyes, I would be lost. At last, we reached a narrow gorge, the frozen river cutting between steep cliffs. My father urged us into the shadows, the rock walls blocking some of the light. For the first time since the moons had risen, the ringing dulled. Though it still throbbed like a heartbeat beneath my skull, we set up a small fire in the shelter of the rocks, huddling close. The dogs lay trembling, their ears pressed flat, their eyes glassy with fear. My mother prayed again, her voice breaking, while my father kept his rifle across his knees. Though we all knew bullets meant nothing here, I drifted into a shallow, fevered sleep, though every sound snapped me awake. The crackle of the fire, the creak of the ice, the wind hissing through the gorge. Once, I thought I heard my own voice whispering from just beyond the circle of light, repeating the words of my journal. My journal, which lay zipped inside my pack. I clamped my hands over my ears and prayed for dawn. But dawn did not come. When I opened my eyes, the sky above the gorge was still dark, the two moons still hanging side by side. My stomach twisted. Had the night stretched longer, or had time itself broken? My father's face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed. "We can't stay," he said hoarsely. "If the sun won't come, we have to move until it does." We broke camp, though the fire had barely kept us warm. As we stepped back onto the river ice, I felt the air shift. The ringing deepened, turning into something like voices, layered and endless, speaking in languages I almost understood. I glanced up against my will, and my breath froze. Shapes clung to the cliffs above us, dozens of them, crawling like insects, their limbs bent wrong, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. They didn't move like people, but they had faces, faces I knew. Isaac, Mrs. Harrow, the schoolteacher, my neighbors. Their eyes glowed with the red light of the second moon, their mouths opening in unison. My mother screamed, yanking me forward, and we ran. The cliffs echoed with laughter. Or maybe it was the sound of rocks cracking, maybe both. The dogs bolted, the sled bouncing wildly behind, my father shouting hoarsely as he tried to steer. I stumbled through the snow, my lungs burning, my mother dragging me onward. The voices from above chased us, calling my name in every tone of familiarity, angry, pleading, loving, mocking. "Rowan," they caroused. "Rowan, come back. We're waiting. We're home." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, refusing to answer, though part of me wanted to. Part of me ached to stop running, to let them take me, to finally know what lay beyond the rules. The temptation was worse than the fear. At last, the gorge widened, spilling us out onto an open plain, where the wind howled unbroken. The sky above shimmered, the red moon swelling until it seemed larger than the world itself. My father pushed us onward, though his legs shook with every step. The dogs stumbled, foam flecking their mouths. I thought we would collapse there, swallowed by the snow, but then something strange happened. A glow appeared on the horizon, not the pale red of the wrong moon, but the faint golden blush of dawn. My heart lurched. "The sun!" I gasped. My mother sobbed with relief. Even my father's shoulders eased for a moment. The second moon dimmed slightly, retreating, though it did not vanish. It watched us as the first light of day spilled over the mountains. The ringing dulled, then ceased. We collapsed on the plain, exhausted, shaking, our breath steaming in the cold. The dogs lay in the snow, too tired to move. My father lifted his face to the sun, his lips moving in silent thanks. For a brief moment, I thought we had survived, that the rules had carried us through again. But then I noticed something strange. The sun was not rising higher. It hovered just above the mountains, frozen in place. The light did not strengthen. It stayed weak, pale, fragile, as though barely keeping the red moon at bay. My relief turned to dread. This was no victory. This was a stalemate. We pressed onward anyway, following the plain south. Days blurred together. The sun remained stuck on the horizon, the world trapped in perpetual half-light. We found no other towns, no hunters, no travelers. Just endless snow and the looming presence of that second moon, always trailing us, always watching. The rules still whispered in my mind, though I no longer knew if they were enough. Once while setting up camp, I heard my father humming under his breath. A tune I recognized, a tune I knew I had whistled years ago. My blood ran cold. He stopped when he saw my face, his expression blank, as though he hadn't realized he was doing it. I said nothing, but the unease coiled tighter in my chest. Nights, if they could still be called nights, grew worse. Shapes circled our camp, just beyond the firelight, their shadows stretching long across the snow. Sometimes I thought I saw Isaac among them, his smile too wide, his hand beckoning. Sometimes I heard my own voice, calling out to me from the dark, promising answers if I would just step beyond the fire. My mother grew quieter, her prayers trailing into silence. My father's eyes grew hollow, his beard wild, his movements sharp and impatient. We were unraveling, piece by piece, as though the forest's patience had finally run out. One night, when the red moon was high and the sun had dipped even lower, my mother vanished. I woke to the sound of the dogs whining, and her side of the blanket was empty, still warm. My father and I tore through the snow, calling her name despite knowing we shouldn't. We found her tracks leading away from the camp, straight into the darkness, where they ended abruptly as if she had stepped into the air. A handprint pressed into the snow beside them, impossibly large, the fingers too many, the palm too wide. My father fell to his knees, clutching the print, his shoulders shaking. I pulled him away, dragging him back to camp as the voices began again, soft and sweet, calling my name in her tone. We did not sleep that night. We did not speak. We sat beside the fire, waiting for the dawn that never came. The second moon glowed brighter, the red light bleeding across the snow, and I understood, finally, that the rules were never about survival. They were delays, thin walls against an inevitable tide. The forest, the moons, the voices, they were not trying to kill us. They were trying to claim us, and one by one they would. After my mother disappeared, my father was never the same. He had always been a man of stone, his strength, his silence, his refusal to let fear show. But something broke inside him that night. He still moved, still hunted, still drove the sled dogs forward, but his eyes were empty. He stopped speaking to me except when necessary, and when he did, his words carried a strange, hollow edge. Stay close. Keep the fire high. Don't answer. He repeated the rules like a machine wound too tight, but the urgency was gone. It was as though he no longer believed they would save us, but he couldn't let himself stop saying them. Maybe repeating the rules was the only thing tethering him to reality. We pressed on through that twilight world, the sun fixed low, the second moon burning red above. Days bled into each other, indistinguishable, but for the deepening exhaustion. The dogs weakened, their ribs showing through their fur, their breath coming ragged. We rationed what little food we had left, but it was never enough. Hunger gnawed at me, until my dreams were filled with visions of feasts, tables piled high with dishes I had never even tasted in reality. I woke with my mouth watering, only to find snow caked in my teeth where I had chewed it in my sleep. My father didn't dream anymore, or if he did, he never spoke of it. It was on the 7th day after my mother vanished that I noticed something I should have seen sooner. My father's shadow had grown longer, much longer, even in the weak sunlight. It stretched out across the snow farther than mine, farther than it should have. At first I thought it was a trick of the angle, but when we stopped to rest, I saw it bend oddly, curving against the slope of the snow in ways that made no sense. My stomach tightened. I said nothing. The rules were clear: don't answer voices. Don't acknowledge what shouldn't be there. Maybe this was another version of that. Maybe even looking at it too long was dangerous. But I couldn't stop noticing. My father's shadow didn't always move when he did. That night, we built a fire in the shelter of some pines. The dogs huddled close, their eyes reflecting the glow. My father sat across from me, staring into the flames. His face was gaunt, his beard rimed with frost. The silence stretched until it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Your mother broke the 4th rule." I stared at him, confused. He didn't look up from the fire. She answered. I heard her. When the voices came that night, she whispered back. Just once. Just one word. That was all it took. He clenched his hands until his knuckles cracked. I couldn't stop her. I wanted to argue, to say he couldn't know that, but the words died in my throat. Deep down, I felt the truth of it. My mother's tracks had led straight into the dark. No struggle, no hesitation. She hadn't been dragged. She had gone willingly. I remembered her prayers, the way her lips had moved in words I didn't understand. Maybe she had always been closer to the other side of the rules than we realized. I lay awake that night, listening to my father's breathing across the fire, and every time he exhaled, I swore I heard another breath join his. A second rhythm, too slow, too deep, as though something breathed with him. The days grew stranger after that. The forest no longer felt like a place we passed through. It felt alive, watching, waiting. Trees shifted positions when I wasn't looking. Paths doubled back on themselves, leading us in circles. Once, I saw a cairn of stones rise out of the snow, where there had been none the day before, a stack so precise it could not have been accidental. My father refused to stop near it. Keep moving, he said flatly, though his eyes lingered on it longer than mine. The second moon glared above, and I began to feel its pull more strongly. At times, I would catch myself craning my neck to stare at it, my mouth opening as though to speak. I never knew what words might come out, and that terrified me more than anything. It was during one of those endless light marches that my father stumbled. He had always been steady, the one to keep us moving, but his knees buckled, and he fell into the snow, his rifle sliding from his grip. I rushed to him, panic clawing my chest. His face was pale, his lips blue, his breath shallow. "We can't stop," I said, trying to haul him up. But his body felt heavy, heavier than it should have been. He looked at me then, and for the first time, I realized how hollow his eyes were. There was no light in them. "Rowan," he whispered, and the sound of my name from his lips made me recoil. It was not his voice, not entirely. It layered over itself, as though two people spoke at once, him and something else. My blood ran cold. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, his fingers digging into my flesh. "You have to keep the rules," he hissed, "even when I don't." The grip loosened. His body slumped, collapsing into the snow. I shook him, shouted at him, but he didn't move. His chest rose once, twice, then stopped. My father was gone. Or at least, the man who had been my father was gone. I sat there in the snow, The dogs whining around me, the second moon staring down, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I wanted to scream, to break every rule at once and let whatever haunted us take me too. But something stopped me. Maybe it was his last words. Maybe it was the weight of the rules themselves, heavy as chains around my neck. I forced myself to bury him beneath a cairn of stones, though my hands shook with cold and grief. His shadow lingered even after the body was covered, stretching across the snow, twitching faintly as though mocking me. I didn't look at it again. That night, I stayed awake by the fire, the dogs pressed close. The voices came as they always did, circling, calling, whispering. But this time, one voice cut through them all. My father's clear, insistent, familiar. "Rowan, help me out. The stones are heavy. Let me in." My heart clenched. I wanted so badly to believe it was him, that somehow he still lived beneath the cairn. But the rules screamed in my head, louder than my longing. "Never answer. Never." I pressed my hands to my ears and stared into the flames until the voice faded. When I finally looked up, the cairn of stones was gone. The snow was smooth, untouched, as though nothing had ever been there. My father's shadow was nowhere to be seen. After that night, I stopped thinking of the rules as guidance. They were not suggestions, not even warnings. They were bargains. They kept me alive because I obeyed them, but each obedience cost me something. My voice, my freedom, my family. Piece by piece, I was being hollowed out, reshaped to fit the silence of the forest. I knew the rules could not save me forever. They only bought time, and the second moon was patient. After my father was gone, the world grew unbearably quiet. I thought it had been silent before, when the townsfolk vanished, when the wind carried only whispers. But this was different. The silence was thick, suffocating, as though even the air had stopped moving. I traveled on with the sled dogs, though they were gaunt and trembling, their breath forming pale ghosts that lingered too long in the half-light. I felt them watching me when I wasn't looking, as though they too wondered how long before I broke the rules. Perhaps they knew better than I did that I was the last one left, and the rules had always been meant to test the last. The days, if they were still days, blurred together. The sun hung low and weak, refusing to rise higher, refusing to set. The second moon kept its post above me, glowing red like an open wound in the sky. I began to notice its pull more strongly, not just in my eyes, but in my body. Sometimes my footsteps angled toward it, without me realizing. Once, I woke to find myself standing on the edge of a frozen lake, staring at its reflection in the ice, my body trembling as though I had walked there in my sleep. The rules pounded in my skull: do not answer, do not whistle, do not stray alone. But I was alone now, wasn't I? Every step I took was alone. One night, or what I thought was night, the voices changed. They didn't just call my name anymore. They told stories. They whispered memories I had not shared with anyone. The tune I had hummed the day I broke the second rule, the words Isaac had whispered to me on the cliffs, the prayers my mother had spoken in secret. They told me they could bring them back. My father, my mother, Isaac, even the entire town. All you have to do, the voices coaxed, is answer. Just one word, Rowan warned, and the silence will end. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. I didn't answer, but I wanted to. God, I wanted to. The dogs began to die. First one, then another, collapsing into the snow, their bodies trembling as though they had run too far, though we had barely moved. I buried them quickly, stacking stones over their bodies, but the cairns never lasted. By morning, the stones were scattered, the snow smooth, the bodies gone. By the third night of this, I stopped building cairns. I left the bodies where they fell, though they never stayed long. The last dog, the oldest, would not look at me anymore. It turned its head whenever I approached. its ribs sharp beneath its fur. One morning, I woke to find its harness lying empty in the snow, the traces trailing off into the dark where no tracks followed. I was alone. I tried to keep moving, though my strength waned. The snow grew deeper, the cold sharper, as though the land itself wanted to bury me. I scavenged what I could, but even the trees seemed stripped bare. Once I found a snare trap I had set weeks earlier. A hare dangled inside, frozen stiff. Relief surged through me, but when I reached to take it, its head turned toward me. Its eyes were human. Isaac's eyes. I dropped it, stumbling back, and when I looked again, the snare was empty. The wire hung slack, swaying gently in the windless air. I didn't set traps after that. The rules haunted me in my dreams, recited in the voices of everyone I had lost. My father's voice telling me not to whistle. My mother's whisper warning me not to answer. Isaac's laugh echoing that I should never go alone. The fifth rule hung over me like a guillotine. If you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. But there was no dawn anymore. The sun hovered like a dying ember, and the second moon never left. The rule had failed, or perhaps it had never been meant to save me in the first place. Perhaps it was a warning of inevitability. When the second moon rises, you cannot be saved. My body weakened. My legs ached with every step. I no longer knew where I was going. South, north, in circles. It didn't matter. The land had become a maze, a trap. Paths bent back on themselves, leading me to cairns of stones I had not built. Once, I stumbled upon my own footprints, days old, circling endlessly in the snow. I knew then that I was not leaving this place. Not alive. The question was not if I would break the rules, but when. It happened on a night when the red moon pulsed brighter than ever, its glow washing the snow in a sickly crimson light. I sat by a fire I could barely keep alive, staring at the weak flames as voices pressed against me from every side. They didn't sound like voices anymore, not exactly. They were a chorus of everything I had ever known, layered and tangled until they were unbearable. I buried my face in my hands, rocking, whispering the rules over and over. Don't answer. Don't whistle. Don't answer. Don't. But then I heard it. My mother's voice, not twisted, not doubled, but clear, pure, exactly as I remembered. Rowan, she said softly, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. Just say something, so I know you're still here. The dam cracked. My throat tightened, my lips parted, and before I could stop myself, I whispered back, I'm here. The words slipped out like blood from a wound. The silence that followed was worse than the voices. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, nothing spoke. Then the snow around me shifted, as though hundreds of feet pressed down at once. Shapes emerged from the dark, circling my fire. They were wrong, impossibly wrong, but they wore faces I knew. My father, my mother, Isaac, the entire town. Their eyes glowed red, their mouths stretched wide in smiles too sharp to be human. They stepped closer, their movements jerky, puppet-like, yet perfectly in unison. You broke the rule, they said together, their voices layered into one impossible sound. My fire guttered and died, plunging me into the red glow of the second moon. The figures closed in, reaching out with hands too long, fingers that bent in too many directions. My heart hammered. My breath tore from my chest. I stumbled back, falling into the snow, the cold burning through my clothes. Their shadows fell over me, stretching long, merging, until I was swallowed in darkness. My name echoed again and again, not as a question, not as a plea, but as a claim. Rowan, Rowan, Rowan. I don't remember how long that lasted. Maybe minutes, maybe days. When I woke, if I truly woke, the snow was gone. The sky was black, studded with stars I didn't recognize. The moons hung side by side, one silver, one red, both enormous, filling half the sky. The figures were gone, but their voices lingered in the air, whispering, humming, waiting. I was lying on bare ground, my body weak, my breath shallow. The rules circled in my mind, but they felt meaningless now. I had broken one, and yet I lived. Or at least, something of me did. Perhaps I had not survived in the way I thought survival meant. Perhaps the rules had never been meant to save me at all, but to prepare me. I sat up slowly, my joints stiff, my skin cold. My hands shook as I reached for my journal, the last piece of my old life. The pages were blank. Every word I had written was gone, erased as though they had never existed. In the margins, new words had appeared, written in a script I did not know but somehow understood. 5 rules. The same 5, repeated again and again, etched into the paper as if burned there. My hand trembled, but I turned the page. More rules, hundreds of them, thousands. Not 5, but countless. I closed the book, my chest tight, my breath shallow. I understood then. The 5 rules were only the beginning. There were more, always more, and I had inherited them. The forest had not destroyed me. It had claimed me. I was no longer a child of the town, no longer the son of my parents, no longer Rowan Keller as I had been. I was something else now, something bound to the rules, something shaped by them. I stood beneath the 2 moons, my shadow stretching across the alien ground, and I whispered the rules aloud, not as warnings, not as prayers, but as commandments. The voices echoed them back, a chorus of agreement. My voice and theirs indistinguishable. The silence was gone. The rules had won. When I first realized the rules had not only survived, but multiplied, I felt the kind of terror that strips thought down to nothing. The book I carried, the journal that had once been mine, was no longer just paper and ink. It was a living ledger, the spine pulsing faintly in my hands, the pages heavy with something more than words. The 5 rules I had grown up with had been burned away, replaced by endless commandments, some familiar, others impossible to comprehend. Never stand beneath a tree that hums. Don't step on the 7th shadow. Never drink water that reflects 2 skies. The rules stretched on without end, and I knew with a bone, deep certainty that I would never learn them all. But I didn't need to. They had already learned me. The world I stood in was not the world I had left. The snow was gone, the bay gone, the cabins, the cliffs, the forests, all of it erased. The land beneath my boots was dark, cracked, brittle as old bone. Towers of stone rose in the distance, jagged and crooked, like the teeth of some impossible creature. The sky overhead was vast, black, studded with stars that shifted when I looked too long, and always, the 2 moons, one pale and familiar, the other red and swollen, leaking its glow into everything. They watched me like eyes, and I understood now that they had been watching all along. I wandered through that place for what felt like days, though time meant nothing there. I did not hunger, did not thirst, though I still felt the motions of both, as though memory alone kept me tethered to the body I once had. Voices followed me, whispering from the cracks in the ground, from the shadows of the stone towers, from the very air. They no longer pleaded. They instructed. They recited the rules, each one different, each one binding. I repeated them back without thinking, my lips moving of their own accord. The rules filled my veins more thoroughly than blood ever had. At some point, I stopped feeling fear. That frightened me more than anything. Fear had been my anchor, my reminder that I was human. But in its place came something else. A sense of belonging, as though I had stepped into a role I was always meant to play. The thought sickened me, yet it warmed me too. I wondered if this was what had happened to the others. Isaac, my parents, the townsfolk. Perhaps they had not vanished. Perhaps they had been absorbed, their voices woven into the chorus that now lived inside me. I listened closely, trying to pick them out. Sometimes, I thought I heard my mother's whisper among the rules, soft and steady. Sometimes I thought I heard Isaac's laugh, sharp and reckless. but I could never be certain. They were part of something larger now, and so was I. I don't know how long I wandered before I found the others. Not townsfolk, not anyone I had known. These were strangers, but they were like me, hollow-eyed, carrying books or scraps of parchment or carvings of stone, each inscribed with their own rules. They did not speak directly, but when they passed, their lips moved in rhythm with mine, repeating commandments in unison. I realized with a jolt that the rules were not mine alone. They were everywhere, scattered across countless lives, countless places, each one carrying its own 5 or 10 or 100. I wondered how many of us there were, drifting in this broken landscape, bound together by whispers of survival we could never fully escape. I wondered how long we had been walking, how long this had been happening. Perhaps forever. Eventually, I came upon a structure, a tower taller than any mountain, its surface carved with lines of text in languages I recognized and others I did not. The air hummed around it, vibrating in my teeth and my bones. I approached, my legs moving without my consent, my journal burning hot in my hands. The doors yawned open, vast and dark. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, each shelf crammed with books like mine, hundreds, thousands, uncountable. Each one was alive, each one whispering, filling the chamber with a roar of rules so loud I staggered. And yet beneath the roar, I could hear them individually. Every rule, every voice. My knees buckled beneath the weight of it. Something waited at the center of that tower. I could not see it clearly. Its form shifted each time I blinked. But I knew it was the source. Or perhaps not the source, but the steward, the keeper of the rules. Its presence filled the air, immense and crushing, yet strangely patient. It did not speak in words but in knowledge, pouring itself into me without consent. I understood then what had happened to my town. We had been a test, a sliver of the larger truth. The rules are not bound to places. They are experiments, bargains, leashes cast across the world. Break them and you are claimed. Obey them and you are used. There is no escape, only assimilation. The figure, or force, extended something toward me. My journal flared, the pages turning on their own, stopping at a blank sheet near the middle. Words seared themselves onto the page, letters writhing like living things. A new rule, one I had never heard before. Do not tell this story. My chest constricted. My lips trembled. But I could not stop myself. I had to tell it. I had been telling it all along. And even as the ink dried, I felt the contradiction tear through me, the rule broken as it was born. The voices surged in fury, then in triumph, then in laughter. My scream joined theirs, though I don't know if it was mine anymore. I don't remember leaving the tower, but I must have. I found myself back on the cracked plain, the 2 moons glaring down. My journal lay heavy in my hands, though I no longer knew if it belonged to me. The pages turned endlessly, each one filled with rules, each one binding me tighter. I walked, and as I walked, I spoke them aloud. They poured from me like water, and I realized this was my purpose now, to carry them, to spread them, to ensure they lived on. The rules were not chains around me anymore. They were my voice, my breath, my skin. I was no longer Rowan Keller, the boy from the Alaskan town. I was the rules themselves, and through me, they would find others, and they have. You are listening now, aren't you? You have heard my story, carried it in your mind, repeated it as you read. That was all it ever took. One word, one voice, one broken rule. You think you are safe, that you are only hearing a tale from some far-off place. But the rules are patient. They seep into silence, into memory, into the cracks of thought. You will remember them, even if you try not to. Don't go into the forest alone. Don't whistle after sunset. Keep your doors locked, even if you are home. Never answer when someone calls your name from the trees. And if you ever see a second moon, hide until dawn. You will remember them, And that is enough. Because once you know the rules, they know you.